All right, before we get started here, you guys know the drill. Drop a like on this video. You don't need to watch the whole video. I already know you guys are gonna like it. I mean, it's a 2-hour video jam-packed with information telling you everything you could possibly need to know about growth hormone and insulin, all right? Drop a like before you forget. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well, because a lot of you guys are watching these videos, but you're not subscribed. I feel like all YouTubers say that. I don't know if it's true. I don't know how to check that, but something tells me, some type of intuition I have tells me you're not subscribed. So give me a subscribe. I'm trying to provide information, trying to help you guys, help me out. Now, after you watch the video, drop a comment. If you have any comments regarding any of the information that we covered, anything you specifically want to see us cover, anybody you want to see me bring onto the podcast in the future, I'll make it happen. Some way, somehow, I'll fucking make it happen. As mentioned in the previous episode that I did with Phil and Kyle, we are contemplating making this a regular thing. So this is take 2. This is the second episode that we're doing together. If you guys want to see us continue doing these regularly, let me know and we'll keep making it happen. Thank you guys for the support. Enjoy the episode. We're just gonna get right into it. I guess we start off with first. I think first, it would be more important to understand insulin before growth hormone. Do you guys think so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's start off by explaining what exactly is insulin. Either of you want to explain it in your own terms. I mean, it's a pretty simple concept, but just for anybody who doesn't know.
Kyle's pretty good at simplifying things, and then I can just throw whatever on top.
Okay. Yeah, so in the most general sense, it's a hormone released by the pancreas, right? And it aids in, I guess, overall performance of the nutrients and kind of transporting them in the most generalized sense.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of times what we do is we explain insulin as a transport because that's, the most simplistic way for people to understand it. But I don't want people to get confused or think that we're passing out wrong information because in a technical sense, it's not actually a transport. It's more of a key. So what happens is there are mechanisms within the cell that have to be what's called translocated, which means just relocated to the surface of the cell in order to pull in glucose and form glycogen. So insulin is more so like a key that turns that on. So it brings everything to the surface so that your body can now absorb and load all of those nutrients. And it does it for a number of nutrients. People think that it's just carbohydrates, but it does it for fat as well. It also affects electrolyte absorption as well. So, one of the things that coaches like to do before the stage is they like to do an electrolyte load. So you'll see people, they call it like a sodium bomb. So what that is it's just a big dose of sodium, 2 grams, 3 grams. I've seen 10 grams, but you need an insulin spike along with it to facilitate. And what that does is it's going to pull a lot of water into the cell along with the electrolytes because electrolytes attract water. And it's a good way to finalize the look, dry out the skin, push a lot of electrolytes into the cell. So when people have carbohydrates, for example, pre-stage like that, the carbohydrates are just so you don't crash. They're not for the finalized peaking process. They're so you don't crash and they get a nice insulin spike and you pull the electrolytes in. But insulin is just something that's going to aid in transport of nutrients into the cell. And without that, we don't do that very well.
Okay. So, I mean, that example you gave was a pretty, I think, advanced example. What would you say the primary purpose of people using insulin in a bodybuilding context? They're usually using it for shuttling glucose. No?
Usually they're using it to shuttle glucose, but we also forget that it also shuttles amino acids. So it's important for a number of different reasons, but primarily, yes, it's glucose. And in the off season, what we're trying to do is we're really trying to load our muscles up with glucose so that it pulls water in. That water gives us extra leverage inside the muscle, gives us more of an anabolic environment, and it facilitates performance and muscle growth. So the more glucose you can load into the muscle, the better you're going to perform, the more sets, reps, volume, and weight you're going to be able to lift. So that's generally what we use it for in the off season, is to really, really push nutrients into the cell beyond what the body normally would do.
So wouldn't you say that there's a cap to that though, necessarily? Like you can only load so much glycogen into a muscle, or can you force more than you would be able to without the presence of insulin, even if you are very insulin sensitive?
Well, we know, post-show, for example, when you're post-show is when we're going to be most insulin sensitive because we're extremely lean. The leaner you get, the more sensitive you are to insulin. So what that means is your body needs to produce less insulin to do the same job. So if somebody were, say, 20% body fat and they ate 50 grams of carbs, well, their body would release a lot more insulin than if somebody in that same situation but was 10% body fat, because they're going to be more insulin sensitive. So a lot less insulin will be released to do the same exact job. And that's why it's important for us to be insulin sensitive, because everything just works more efficiently that way. So now, as far as what you were asking about, that's what's called supraphysiological levels of glycogen, what you're talking about, which is intracellular carbohydrate energy. So yes, we've seen from post-show on rebounds that we can cause a super compensatory effect. So we can do that to an extent, but ultimately what's going to determine that is basically your storage capacity, the size of the gas tank. So we've talked about myofibril hypertrophy, and we've talked about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Well, myofibril would be, heavy lifting weights and really heavy poundages, more like a Branch Warren type, where he doesn't really like to do high reps, just was very heavy weight. And what happens is people that go higher volume are going to have more of sarcoplasmic type hypertrophy, which is an increase in the size of the gas tank. So what that does is it allows you to load a lot more glucose into the muscle than is typical, but you have to train for it. So I've always trained extremely high volume throughout my life. If you look at early pictures of me, I was not round at all. I did not have a round look at all, but people typically know I always overtrained. I always trained 2 hours, 3 hours, crazy volume, didn't count my sets or reps. I just kept going and going because I liked to and I enjoyed it. And then I would drink Gatorades during the workout. So what happened is I really pushed my sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So that can be a good thing and a bad thing because it gave me more roundness. But what that also did is my physique now fluctuated a lot, whether I was flat or full. If I was flat, I looked like I couldn't win a local show. If I was full, I looked like I could win a national show. So it can be good and bad. You do want both. But yes, you can cause a super compensatory effect based on how you train, based on how you eat, based on your genetics, and based on how you use things like insulin.
Okay, you just touched on something. I really don't want to get off tangent here, but you just opened up a question that I have regarding the high volume sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, because I will say I am pretty sure that there's no evidence to that. This is all within theory, right?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's very little solid evidence for anything that we have. But if we look at what we see and we look at the results, bodybuilding is almost always ahead of the research and science because
I know. Listen, I know what you're going to say. I'm just trying to clear this up. We don't have actual literature based on like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy being a direct link to higher volume. But what I will say is if we look at the older physiques in like the 80s and 70s and 90s, they were known to do this higher volume approach. And this is what I'm trying to link it back to. It is anecdotal. I don't know if there's any actual literature behind it, but based off what you're saying, it does make sense that these physiques had this rounder, fuller look. And when you see the guys who do like the powerlifting style training, all heavy, low reps, they do have like that denser, but they don't have that fullness. So I don't know if that's just a direct link. I'm sure there's genetic factor to it, but I do think there is some,
We see countless evidence for this. As far as I'm concerned, this is a foregone conclusion. Like I'm almost positive about this one because of what I've seen and because of the things that I've surveyed. When I was younger, I liked to ask a lot of people different questions based on, what I saw in their physique, and I tried to connect the dots and reverse engineer the situation. So if you look at a Branch Warren, he doesn't really do a lot of high reps, but he lifts very, very, very heavy. He's pretty much all myofibril hypertrophy and growth. Hip flat versus full doesn't change very much. He could be flat, he still looks full because he's not depending on the glycogen to make him look fuller. He'll just get harder or softer, but you don't really see his dimensions change. You don't see his, fullness and flatness vary very much. He's posted pictures flat and full, and there's not much difference except for the hardness and dryness that he gets. Whereas if you have somebody who's more of a sarcoplasmic type physique, you'll see more fluctuation. And that's almost always the higher volume trainers. So yes, there is a genetic component, but again, as I've said, with the anecdotal evidence and experience that we have in this field, as far as what we've done and the people that we've worked with, and listen, I've worked with probably thousands of people. Kyle, probably the same. Would you disagree with this at all?
No. So I think a couple of things to point out, right, is as far as the literature goes, right, a lot of the times when people try to cite literature, at the end of the day, a lot of it's not done on these controlled environments. What I mean by that is you're taking bodybuilders, and you're taking enhancements, right? A lot of the evidence that we do have is always based on the average 10 in the population and then taking it against another 10 and how much protein they can, upregulate in terms of is it better if they're at 2 grams per pound of body weight, etc. Right? So a lot of the times when I do see someone cite literature, it's just like, hey, this isn't on someone taking 2 grams of test, right? So it's all a little different. And then, hey, this person neurologically connects really well because they've been trained for 15 years. So like I always kind of, I don't want to say it waters down a lot of the studies, but I take it with a grain of salt, like anything else, right? So you had mentioned, I guess going back to your original question, Sebastian, in terms of like, I guess you had worded it, if you take more insulin, like, can you, like, why not take more, I guess, in a very generalized sense, right? And I think if you
Yes.
don't grow so fast and then post show, most people, because of, I guess out there it's been proven not to just go and start lifting heavy post show when you're super lean and dry because you can get hurt. So what most people do, they get crazy pumps, right? Because they're starting to eat a lot of food. And then at first it works, they get pretty full, but then they wreck their sensitivity and then they start getting softer. But that initial jump in weight, they look more round, right? So I think it's proven. And again, I think I like the example that you used, Phil, or somebody said powerlifting. A lot of the powerlifters, they're strong as shit, right? They can move a house.
And they're
However,
thick.
none of them ever look like Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler. Now, yes, genetics play a role in terms of the shape of the muscle, but it's very evident when you have powerlifters lift in that low rep range, 1 to 3 reps, for example. That's not really doing anything for building muscle, right? So even if they took insulin, for example, they're not going to look any different. They might get stronger, right? But the look comes from obviously in that hypertrophy rep range. So I think that's just something to kind of point out. So I agree with everything you're saying, Phil. I think though maybe there's no studies that show that there's such validity behind the sarco volume being proven to really make the roundness, we see it countless times. And I think anyone that trains or does a show, if you start training in the 15 to 20 rep range, you're going to notice, I feel like you're a little rounder. You might be weaker. You might not see your performance in terms of strength increase, but the look changes. And that's where you have to, there's like a fine line, right? You have to have the muscle, but then you have to have the detail and the sharpness as well and the roundness.
Yeah, no, the powerlifting example that you gave was phenomenal because we've actually seen people that powerlifted for most of their lives transfer into bodybuilding and do shows and get peeled and get in shape. And
I mean, look at Larry Wheels.
I can't think of a single one that's round, not one, because they never trained high volume. So I can think of guys that are really thick. I can think of guys with great muscle groups. Like, look, Mike Bezeritel's chest. Look at his chest. Like it's thicker than you could. I can't even say, but he doesn't have that roundness to him. Now, granted, yes, he is a little bit older, and you'll lose some fullness with that. But you could tell he's not a high volume trainer based on the way his muscles look. And he's posted pictures where he said he was flat, but he doesn't really look very flat. He still looks pretty damn thick, Whereas like a person who's bodybuilded most of their life, when they're flat, you could see it, because he's more so myofibril composition rather than sarcoplasmic dominant. So he doesn't change a whole lot when he's flat versus full. He just changes basically his condition, maybe looks a little denser, but his dimensions don't change a lot. And again, good example, Larry Wheels, same thing. He's got like big peaked biceps and things like that. One of them is torn, I think, but he doesn't have that round look to him because he's never trained that way. And you're going to see this across the board. That's why it's crazy. Like, people will cite research on certain topics and debate us on, whether metabolic stress can build muscle and things like that. But you go ask the top people that actually have done this for decades with people, the top coaches in bodybuilding. None of us are disagreeing with each other. Why? Because we've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, this opens a whole different discussion, so I think we should just get into that on a different episode because we could go so in depth on the whole high volume thing and whatnot with the demonization of it. You only need to do it with low reps. I think there's validity to both sides, but that's a whole different discussion. So back to the original point of, I was saying that there has to be a cap to it, right? So what I've seen in a lot of cases in other coaches' protocols, or which is what I've seen from what they'll do, is you have the base diet, right? And what they'll do now, in addition to the base diet, is they'll incorporate insulin. Now, with the insulin, they'll incorporate an additional amount of carbohydrates. And in often cases, what I've seen is the person just ends up getting fat, right? So there has to be a cap to how much.
I think when people, I eat it a lot, right? Because I have that demographic of people that are looking to be the next CBUM as quick as possible. And insulin comes up. It's like a kind of a known but unknown. What's it going to do? Let me take it. Oh, it's not magic. Maybe it is. You don't just say, hey, I want to take insulin and let me change my diet accordingly. You always want to optimize the bodily functions, right? So when you have someone's diet, if everything is perfect, you don't need insulin, right? Post show, you don't not necessarily need insulin. How long have you been dieting? Where's your A1C? What is the response, right? How hard have you dieted? What are you taking? when you want to incorporate insulin, you have a rhyme and reason behind it. At least you should. And then you look at the diet and say, okay, how can I optimize this? Where in the diet can I place insulin that would help? When I test my blood glucose levels, is there a need? And if there's not a need, guess what? Just because it works for Tom doesn't mean you need it. And now, can you use insulin? Sure. But what happens when you use it at the wrong time? You start to, again, how I look at it is your ceiling, you're now lowering, right? You're not necessarily getting higher. You're just lowering your ceiling because you now have a need for it even more. You can do some damage to yourself if you're kind of negligent about it. And if you start using the wrong types of insulin, which we can get into a little bit later. So that's my first concern with insulin is you don't just say, I want to use insulin. Let me change the diet or add 10 grams per IU of insulin, something like that, whatever units I'm putting in.
Yeah, me and Kyle have had this discussion for many, many years. I knew he was going to jump on that the second you said it. I was like, here we go, because he gets agitated by that a little bit, because it's true. Like it is agitating for when you see a coach trying to program insulin, and I'd say probably 80% of them do it wrong. So like Kyle said, what they do is they say, okay, I want to take 10 IUs now. How do I match the carb? No, that's not what you do. You take the current diet and you say, how do I optimize this by using insulin? Now, sometimes you might have to add a little bit of carbohydrates to make sure the person doesn't crash, especially if they have a fast metabolism. But you don't do it the other way. Why don't you do it the other way? The reason you don't do it the other way is because you're not trying to optimize the diet. When you do it that way, you're actually increasing a lot of carbohydrates, and then you're taking insulin and it starts to accumulate body fat. Now you've just ruined your insulin sensitivity. So now that same amount of insulin that you're taking is no longer as effective. Now you're going backwards. So what do you do? You take more. And then it continually snowballs in the wrong direction. So that's actually the wrong thing to do, is program the insulin and then try to do the diet around the insulin protocol. That's not what you do. You look at the diet and then you decide, how am I going to use insulin to optimize this diet? And now, based on genetic factors, what you know about the client or yourself, and what it is you're trying to do, it's going to be done in a number of different ways. And I always tell people, if you looked at 10 different clients of mine on insulin, you'd think it was written by different coaches, because I don't do it the same way twice. I do what that person needs. And in those specific situations and scenarios, I'll do it pre-meal. I'll do it pre-meal to optimize priming for the meal. I'll do it to optimize absorption of the meal. I'll do it post-meal. I'll do it between multiple meals. I'll do it wherever I see it needed. Now, you can use insulin to elevate different things and have synergy with different things like GH, which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's a different story. But yes, as Kyle said, absolutely true. You do not write down a protocol and then design a diet around the protocol, which is what almost everyone does.
Yeah, I think I've seen insulin used incorrectly more than I've ever seen it used correctly, to be honest. It ruins a lot of people.
There's these primers that used to be on the forums that everybody likes to follow, and then people will always ask me, when I do a Q&A, 100% of that time I get, what's an insulin protocol? There's no such thing. There's no protocol. You need to understand what it does. You understand physiology, how it works in the body, what the interaction is, what it's doing, what you're trying to accomplish, and that's how you apply it. But the problem is, people think that it's just so simple as, just add insulin and cover it with carbohydrates and take it post-workout and you're good and you're going to grow. I could literally sit here and tell you that 90% of the coaches, they go with the whole 10 IU post-workout and then have a shake of carbohydrates. That's what almost everyone does. Oh, give me a protocol. No such thing. That it'll work a little bit, but it's not going to work nearly as well as somebody who actually understands how to use and program insulin.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you feel about the statement that insulin is the most anabolic hormone?
It's very anabolic. It depends how you use it.
Kyle, what do you think?
So people will debate this till you're blue in the face and cite science and research, but I feel like we could just use simple logic on this. It's going to increase uptake of aminos. It's going to increase cellular hydration. It's going to increase leverage, which is going to increase your performance. So there's a number of different things. It's going to elevate IGF. It elevates IGF BP3, which is going to amplify IGF. It does so many different things that either are directly or maybe call it indirectly anabolic. You got to be crazy to think that there was a very, very big, or supposedly big name coach years ago that said they don't use insulin, they don't think that it's anabolic or it's effective. And it was the most laughable thing that I could possibly think of. You couldn't say something further from the truth or demonstrate more lack of understanding than just make a statement like
that.
Kyle? So I don't disagree with what Phil's saying. However, I think that's more the advanced level, right? So when I get people that are beginners, intermediates, you haven't even tapped into how to really lock in and follow a diet consistently for a year, right? Maybe you didn't even explore taking higher amounts of testosterone, right? So again, I look at it like there's levels to everything. If you go right to the major leagues or the utmost top, you're going to realize like, hey, I don't look like these guys. Where do I go next? You can either take more and try to kill yourself, or you realize that, oh, okay, I need to do something different. It's not working, right? So I think at some point it allows you to tap into untapped potential potentially. However, most of the time people they want to rush. Everyone wants everything tomorrow as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when they do it that way, there's times I've used insulin for sure with some people, and they don't get the best results because why? They ruin their sensitivity. They eat off plan. They get fat. And now guess what? Your off season's ruined. Just like if you don't take the reverse, when we talked about in our first episode, somewhat seriously, you can set your next 6 months down the drain, right? Your whole off season's kind of crushed now because you didn't approach it the right way. So I think it's helpful, but again, I think it's reserved for the right type of people in terms of the advanced lifters.
That's actually an invaluable point that he just made, is the fact that you need to be on the level to use it, because a lot of people like to use it like a crutch. They don't follow their diet. They don't do everything properly. So they think that, oh, well, I'm not getting my gains because this is going to compensate. This is going to jump me ahead, and then I can go out and party and do what I want, and I'm still going to grow. That's not how this works. If you can't nail down your diet and training, you shouldn't be touching insulin. Insulin is something that's going to optimize things, not compensate for things, not in place of a proper diet and training, because what's going to happen is, like he said, you're just going to ruin your sensitivity. A lot of times people think that people would ask, how long can I run insulin? I'm sure that's a question that's going to come up in this. How long can I run insulin? And my answer is indefinitely. You can run it as long as you'd like, as long as you don't screw up your sensitivity. If you stay leaner, manage your diet, eat clean, and manage your body fat and your recovery and stress factors and all of those things, and you stay insulin sensitive. I have done, and I've proven that I can increase insulin sensitivity by using insulin. So that's a fallacy that you've got to run insulin in cycles and you can only run it for a period of time. That's not true at all. As long as you're using it properly. The problem is most people don't use it properly, and that's where this fallacy comes from, because people screw up their sensitivity, gain body fat, start going backwards, like, oh, we have to take a break. No, you just did it wrong.
Yeah. It's funny because you said you could improve sensitivity with insulin use. I don't know if you saw my story the other day. I just got a client who came to me like 2 weeks post show, and he sent me his lab work, and I could see that his A1C was previously 5.3, like around a year ago. And then I guess he started working with this guy, and this guy had him on Lantis and Rapid every day since his off season, all throughout prep, had him use a GDA with every single meal. 2 weeks after prep, his A1C was somehow 5.6, which leads me to believe that was probably higher than it in his actual fucking off season. It was just insane. He said every day he would wake up, have his coach would make him test his morning BG. And if it was over 90, he would increase Lantis every day. If it went over 90, which is just fucking insane. And he almost made him diabetic.
Well, Kyle also already touched on this when he mentioned different types and certain types that will desensitize you. So he's already touched on this before. I wasn't sure if we were going to get into the types or not. But yeah,
no. We're gonna break down all the types. We're gonna break it. We'll get to
that. We'll get to that as we move along. But yes, the type of insulin you use and how you use it can absolutely affect sensitivity. You want it to basically get in, do its job, and get out. You don't want it to sit there and be lingering the whole time, because then that's going to affect things. So Kyle jumped ahead a little bit and mentioned that previously, but that's a very, very valid point once again, that if you're using it wrong, you can still screw things up.
Yeah. Well, I think most people don't understand how to use a majority of compounds in general, but I feel like I've always felt like the saying that insulin is the most anabolic hormone, it can be indirectly anabolic, but it's not anabolic itself, right? Like it's not like using any anabolic compounds like testosterone or tren. And I think it kind of gives the false message out there that I think it makes people want to use it and think that they're going to get this crazy result, and they can just add on these carbohydrates, and it creates this idea that it's something that it's not. You know what I mean? Like somebody could use PEDs, they could use testosterone and tren, like they're going to get results regardless. But then they think, oh, anabolic's the most, insulin's the most anabolic. They start taking insulin and they get a negative effect from it because it doesn't work the same. It's not like using a performance enhancement drug.
A simple question is just, is IGF-1 anabolic? The answer is yes. And it elevates and amplifies IGF-1. So you could call it directly anabolic. There's a lot of claims that are made, coaches talking about different drugs and PEDs and things. I think I'm not sure if it's a lack of understanding, a lack of intelligence, or just the fact that they're trying to separate themselves from the pack and differentiate themselves and say something that's not common, that's different, to make it seem like they know something that other people don't, and really trying to draw attention to themselves. I'm not sure what the culprit is. Like, we have right now a few people that are saying, all anabolic steroids are the same potency milligram for milligram. Anybody who's taken tren and test knows you're full of shit. I'm not sure if you want me cursing on here, but
you can curse.
Like, anybody who says that, I immediately completely lose respect for you. Either you're lying or you're not very smart.
Well, it's the literature. They're confusing the literature with, I think it has to do with something with like nitrogen retention or something like that. Like all the PEDs on paper and literature like produce this same outcome, but in a practical application, we all know that's not how it actually fucking works.
Then why do we use lower doses of tren versus test? Why?
I mean, I'm sure you could find a reason that they'll give you, but it's bullshit. Yes, it's just a misunderstanding of the literature.
100 milligrams every other day of tren versus 250 milligrams every other day of test. Why is that always stronger on tren? Why?
I mean,
it's such a basic, stupid argument that anybody who says that, I just have no respect for you. You're either incompetent or you're a liar.
Well, it's based around those models. You know what models I'm talking about.
I don't care what models it is. We literally, anybody at home right now, try it. Anybody at home right now, I want one person to do 250 tests every other day and then do a cycle of 100 tren every other day. Tell me you didn't get stronger and bigger on the tren. I dare one person to tell me that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? But I think now, okay, because I want to tie this together. Let's segue into explaining what exactly growth hormone is so we can tie this together, right? So what is growth hormone? What is IGF-1? Give me your best explanation of that.
All right, Kyle, you want to lead this one?
No, you can. I took the insulin. You take the growth hormone. You do a good job with it.
Growth hormone is very simple. It's a hormone in our body that has a number of different effects without getting too complex and too in-depth. But what we're looking for in bodybuilding is we're looking for composition control. We're looking for repair, recovery. We're looking for muscle growth, right? People don't realize that growth hormone is actually very, very popular in pro sports, especially NFL. Why? Because you have the biggest, strongest, most fastest, most athletic people on earth hitting each other. How do you survive that season? How do you recover week to week, practicing and getting and doing all of that every single week? Well, you need to upregulate collagen synthesis and upregulate recovery, right? That way you can still play and function and things don't tear and break. And then sometimes we'll see somebody who will have like a serious injury or serious sprain and they're playing next weekend. How the heck did that happen? Well, we know how that happened. People are in denial about these things, but it's going to accelerate recovery. It's going to upregulate collagen synthesis. It's going to accelerate healing throughout the body. You'll notice if you have a cut on your arm, it's going to heal faster. If you have an ache and a pain somewhere, it's going to heal faster. I don't know if my friend wants me mentioning his name, but popular coach that I have known for a long time. Actually, I think broke his back in a car accident and was deadlifting, I think, 600 again inside a year. And what did he do? High dose GH. So we know that it'll enhance recovery, and one of the ways that it does that is through elevating IGF-1. So what happens is what we're looking for with GH a lot of the time is what's called cellular proliferation. It's just cell division. It's just a fancy word for saying cell division. And then at some point we want differentiation, which is exactly what the root word sounds like. Differentiate. So it becomes different. Once the cells proliferate, you have basically a base cell that doesn't have a job, not assigned to anything. And then when it differentiates, it becomes a certain specific type of cell. And at that point, now it becomes functional. And what we want is we want more muscle cells, right? Because there's clear research that shows that one of the limiting factors of how big we get is how many muscle cells that we're born with. And I think I've told this story on a podcast a few times that I was stuck at 220 for a number of years, and I just couldn't get bigger. And no matter what I did, I wasn't really willing to go crazy with the doses, but I did eat more. I did train harder. I did try to rest more, and it was just moving at a snail pace. And then consequently, Johnny gave me a Geno pen for my birthday, and I did it, and I really liked it. And I was like, oh, well, maybe it was water. And then, slowly but surely, I got more money together, and I did more, and then I started breaking those plateaus like clockwork. And it was because likely my body my body had maxed out the number of muscle cells that I have. Some people are born with more than others. And that's why it's a plateau break. Certain coaches in the industry figured that out early and built their reputation on it, just blasting people on GH and stacking muscle on them. And then it seeming like they had some secret formula when all it was a high dose of GH. Jay Cutler's famous for being quoted saying, do as much as you can afford. Now, we know that's not a good idea now because of all the side effects that come with it. It starts causing insulin resistance and a number of other factors. But for the most part, the more GH you can take without the side effects, the better you're going to get. Problem is, it upregulates collagen synthesis too, so it starts to thicken your skin, and that's why we see a lot of detail disappearing on guys. Because
what you're referring to is hyperplasia, right?
Hyperplasia, yes, cell division.
Okay.
So hypertrophy is an increase in the size of the cells. Hyperplasia is cell division, more cells.
Create more muscle cells to hypertrophy.
That's just as simplistic as I can make it.
Yes. Okay. So now, why are GH and insulin often used in conjunction with one another, and is it necessary to use them both together?
Okay, well, what happens is a lot of times when you use GH, well, pretty much all the time when you use GH, it starts to affect your insulin sensitivity. So what you do is you start to replace some of that with exogenous insulin. Exogenous meaning administration outside the body. And
why does that happen, though?
What is that?
Why does it cause insulin resistance, though?
It causes insulin resistance for a number of different reasons. Now, a lot of people like to say that, I just want to make this point before moving forward. A lot of people like to say that GH is great for controlling body composition, right? Because it shifts the body from a glucose using machinery to more of a fat burning machinery, right? But it also affects your thyroid. I'm not sure the new research, but I'm pretty sure, as far as we know, what it does is it downregulates overall T3 levels, but it increases T4 to T3 production conversion, which is why we usually supplement and replace that. But it can affect thyroid function, and it can cause some insulin resistance due to a number of different reasons and different factors. Without a base lesson, it's going to get a little confusing. So let's just stick on the fact that it doesn't cause a lot of insulin resistance. Keep that in mind. It's dose dependent. The more you use, the more insulin resistance you're going to get. If you're using, say, 4 IUs of GH, you don't need exogenous insulin. And just to be clear, endogenous means internally produced, exogenous means administered to you, for everybody listening so that nobody is confused with those words. So if you're using 4 IUs, 6 IUs, you're not going to have the level of insulin resistance necessary to start administering exogenous insulin. That's not going to happen until you start reaching 8 and 10. Now, what happens is people a lot of times will confuse this, because what they'll do is they start using GH and they think that because it helps control body composition, I can eat a lot more, right? But then they start gaining body fat. And then the gaining of body fat is what contributes to the insulin resistance. So you're not getting as much insulin resistance directly from the GH as you would think. You're also getting it from the increased calories. If you didn't start banging the calories up higher, then you wouldn't experience as much insulin resistance, and it wouldn't be a problem. Me personally, I would say that 6 IUs and below, you probably don't need to supplement with insulin. Now, you can amplify things, which we're going to get into with the synergy as far as what it does for IGF in conjunction. But I think that anything 6 IUs and below, you're not going to need to administer exogenous insulin to your body. You just need to make sure you're monitoring, and it's going to affect people at different levels too. So you're going to need to monitor your A1C. You're going to need to monitor your thyroid and see what exactly it is doing to you, because it's going to affect some people more than others. It's never affected my thyroid ever. But again, in my family, my thyroid runs high, and actually right now I'm actually controlling hyperthyroidism, which my father had, which is starting to kick in with me. And I caught it because I was sweating at night. And I caught it. So different topic, administered carnitine, started controlling it. But it never affected my thyroid because my thyroid is always overactive. Whereas somebody who is a little bit more sensitive, and especially women, you've got to be careful because it can affect your thyroid. A lot of times what I find is that people trying to get peeled for a show, right? Everybody can get to the 4 weeks out point, the 6 weeks out point where you're pretty lean, and then they struggle to get peeled. And, a lot of people are going to pick up on this one, but I find a lot of times pulling the GH is what fixes it. You'll break that plateau just by pulling the GH.
We also see GH cause water retention, no?
GH does cause water retention too, but the thing is, with 4 IUs, especially on a contest prep diet, now it's not affecting your insulin sensitivity barely at all. So you're not going to be holding water very much. It does increase ADH and different things that make you hold water. So I don't want to get into another complex lesson with that. But yes, it can cause water retention in high enough doses. So I will pull the dose down if I have somebody high, say 8 IUs, 10 IUs, to get a clearer look at what I'm looking at and make sure I see how high their body fat is and I'm not mistaking it for water and over dieting them and making bad decisions. But generally, that's not a big thing that happens. That's more so with pros and top level amateurs that you're going to encounter those types of things. So water retention is not going to be a big factor, especially in contest prep at that point. So what you really want to do is remove any type of interference with insulin resistance, with thyroid function. And what usually happens is I don't really change the program very much. I pull the GH out and the body starts responding again.
Okay. Kyle, you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think, you touched on some negatives of the growth hormone, right? And what it can do at higher dosages. And I guess, sometimes speaking, as you mentioned, to the advanced people or someone that has walked into some money and is spending a lot with the water retention, right? I always just point out that silent killer of like higher blood pressure and kind of ignoring those things. And that can come with insulin. Growth hormone can come with just abusing, some orals that hold and retain a little bit of water. So just wanted to point that out. But I think everything you said, makes sense and is very valid. I think growth hormone is very beneficial for many. Do you need it to get to a top level? No, there's been guys that obviously get to the top level without it. And then most of the time I haven't come across anyone, and I've been around pretty much everyone at the top level, even currently still, everyone has mentioned when they put it in, they've always seen benefits from it, right? Now, do they credit their entire success to it? No, but anything that helps, hey, especially when you get to the top level, you're doing anything it takes to just put on a couple more pounds of lean tissue or, to make progress.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people have maxed out where they're at as far as trying to grow without it or trying to grow without high doses. So, if we look at patterns, like a lot of times I can tell what somebody's taking or what somebody's doing based on the pattern of their progression throughout their career, right? So if I see somebody who's, their face is purple, they're always aggressive, they're very vascular, things like that, I can tell their PEDs are high. But if they start stalling out and then all of a sudden they start growing again and they're holding a bunch of water and their belly sticking out, I know what they did. They banged the GH dose up. Of course they did. And we listen, if you go back and watch even some of the top Olympians today, if you go back and track their progression, from when they got big, you can watch what happened to their waistline. You can watch what happened to their water retention. You can watch what happened with their detail. I know I've sent both of you guys a picture of Jay Cutler when he turned pro. I think it was USA. And his strided lats, Christmas tree, clear detail, strided glutes and everything, right? And then from his last Olympia, that was all gone. And I asked people, I said, do you really think Jay forgot how to get peeled and dry? Like, he's pretty peeled and dry from the front. Like, he didn't forget. He got better at this. Skin got thicker. That's what happened.
Well, I would think the only division that growth hormone would really be warranted necessary would be open, or obviously 212. Do you think it would be warranted as necessary in men's physique and classic too?
I pull it out of my classic guys, honestly. Like the guy that won the junior USA overall this year, I was begging him to switch to classic for years. And the second he said he would switch, I said, okay, pull the GH out. I was like, all right, well, I bought all this. I was like, all right, finish what you have and we're never using it again. Done. Because I don't want to, classic is a detail division. I don't want to affect your waistline. I don't want to affect your detail and your skin as thin as possible. So like there's a big mistake that a lot of the open guys are making right now. Some of them have issues with thicker skin and people talk about it constantly. But then you can see based on their waistline and based on their water retention and their progression that they're on a decent dose of GH. And I think that's the worst thing you could do. There's a couple guys on the Olympia stage that honestly, I feel like, if the right person coached them, they could have won already. Just figuring out little tiny things like this. If somebody doesn't have any details to certain body parts and their skin is thick, keep the GH down. Let their skin thin out. It's going to happen with age. So if skin thins with age, as your collagen synthesis down regulates. So if you see somebody's skin getting thicker with age, they're really banging that GH dose. And it's probably the wrong direction. Did they get bigger? Yeah, they got bigger. Did they get rounder? Yeah, they got bigger. But at what cost?
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I think there's a time and a place to use it, right? But as you mentioned, if someone is looking for more roundness to get bigger, right, their issues, they don't have enough muscle, and they have already explored the higher anabolic route, or perhaps for health reasons they can't really push it more, then sure, I get it. But at some point, it's bodybuilding, it's an art, right? So it's not the mass monster, how big and thick can you get? Because we kind of started to go down that route for a bit, and now they're pulling it back to the more aesthetic ever since, like, I'd say, Rodin won, potentially, the Olympia, right? It's like very distinct look to where, hey, by the way, this is still bodybuilding. The shape is always going to prevail. So I think I've seen it used. I've used it with people in different divisions, but at higher dosages. Again, I think that's a different beast. And I guess a question for you, Phil, right, is obviously we always associate the higher growth hormone with gut distension to a degree. But how much do you think it is because people don't pay attention to digestion and they're just trying to grow too fast? So, not just taking higher amounts of growth hormone, but just like slamming unnecessary amounts of food. Do you think that potentially you could use more growth hormone if you were a little wiser with what your food selection was and how you went about it that way?
Okay, I'm gonna add on to that. I'm gonna add on to it before you answer, because I
Yeah.
always thought the GH gut was caused more so just by the insulin resistance and the abundance of overeating, not growth hormone itself. But I guess hyperplasia could play into abdominal distension. But
Well,
that big,
Kyle nailed it pretty much. That was a very astute observation, what he just said. As far as the GH gut is a culmination of a number of factors. It's not just one factor. Listen, you could get a quote unquote GH gut from ascites, which is, liver damage and then water retention in that area, and that would look like GH gut, but it's not from the growth hormone, so it could be from a number of different factors. So I think one of the things that he mentioned, which was absolutely nailed, was inflammation. Again, but like I said earlier, when people start taking GH, they think, oh, well, I can control my body composition now. I can eat more. And they just start banging food. But you can only process so much, right? And then you get digestive distress, and then you get damage to the intestinal tract. Now, here I'm going to throw some theories at you that I don't have any solid evidence behind, but this is what I believe, what I think, could be right, could be wrong. But I believe that, listen, any area that we stress and damage on the body is going to repair and recover, and it's going to induce hyperplasia, right? We do it to our muscles. So what happens if we start damaging and inflaming our intestinal tract? Because I can tell you right now, right away, I had 1 year where I really banged GH. I was on 10 IU most of the time, then went to 12 for, I think, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then I went to 14 for 2 weeks. Luckily, contest prep happened, and I had to stop, or it would have gotten bad. But my stomach was getting worse and worse and worse. And people I was posing would tell me, "Suck your stomach in." I was making excuses. Oh no, my stomach's full. I ate earlier. I'll do it later. It's complete horseshit. I couldn't suck my stomach in because it felt like something was blocking it. Now, I could tell you, in all through my 20s and early 30s, I had phenomenal abs because when I flexed my stomach, I felt like my stomach was empty. I felt like nothing impeded it. I felt like I could flex my abs and wrap them around my spine. And luckily, like now, I've been able to work back towards that. It took a long time. But when I was bodybuilding, I was taking a lot of GH and I was eating a lot of food. I could not suck in. It felt like something was in the way. Something was stopping me from getting my stomach in and being able to flex it. Now, I believe a portion of that is visceral fat due to the insulin resistance from the high doses, right? But I also believe it was intestinal inflammation and damage and intestinal growth. I truly believe that that's what happened because now, even today, when I suck in, I still feel hollow, but it doesn't feel like I did in my 20s. It doesn't feel like my abs are like glued to my spine when I flex them. Like it felt empty. It felt like the best peak contraction you could possibly think of, and I could do it 24/7 around the clock. I can kind of do it now, but when I was competing in my later years, couldn't do it at all. There was something in the way. So yes, it was inflammation. It was visceral fat. It was water retention. It was a culmination of things. It wasn't just one thing that did it.
Okay, so when you take like an extreme example of like Dave Palumboism, you think that's mostly intestinal growth, inflammation, more so than anything else?
Dave Palumbo was an extremist. What did he posted a 10 meal a day diet, and he was eating McDonald's and he was eating all kinds of crap. And the funny part about that is he got busted for selling fake GH, but he had a GH gut because he wasn't taking what he was selling, so he knew better. I always found that kind of funny. Listen, facts are facts, right? You have a GH gut, or fake GH. Obviously, you weren't taking fake GH, so you knew better. But he was eating 10 meals a day. He was blasting GH. That's where the whole term Palumboism came from. All the listeners here, you guys might not be familiar with it. In a very extreme GH gut, Dave Palumbo pretty much had the worst GH gut in the history of bodybuilding that we've seen. So people started calling it Palumboism instead of GH gut to kind of mock him and make fun of him. But it was very, 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 very bad. It was so bad on stage that he looked pregnant. But it's a lesson. He didn't know any better. He was one of the first to really try to play with that, I think, and to push that amount of food. He ate more food than anybody you could imagine because he had an insanely fast metabolism. And there's something to say about how dedicated and determined a bodybuilder is to be able to do that. Because if you look at that diet that he was eating, I couldn't do it. I don't know anybody who could. Maybe Nick Walker if he really wanted to, because he's just a robot. But I don't really know many people that could have done that. And Dave Palumbo did it for years on end. So that's a really tough, determined guy that probably didn't enjoy it. But yeah, I think that banged up his abdominal wall pretty bad. And then what you see is loss of detail when they start banging up their abdominal wall too, and it doesn't really return.
Okay, so you would say the primary contributing factor to this gut distension isn't necessarily the GH or insulin itself. It's kind of what they do as a byproduct of what that individual.
I believe it is the GH. I believe that when you start to damage your intestinal tract, well, what happens? You get inflammation, you get water retention in those areas, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you were to eat clean, normal amounts of food in the first place, the gut distension wouldn't be a worry.
We see that today. I know. I'm trying to think of how many I can name. I don't want to get too specific, but I'll say within the past 5 to 10 years, I know 2 guys that have been on the Olympia stage that I am almost positive around 18 IUs of GH and didn't have a GH gut. So it is controllable. I think the more we learn and the more we know, the better we're getting at controlling it. And like I said, Dave's gut got like that because we didn't know very much. He was a pioneer with it, right? He didn't have the information we have today. If he did, he probably wouldn't have ended up like that. And I think a lot of guys today are now learning how to use high doses of GH and control that and not let that happen. Listen, we've seen some pros, couple that I can think of, that I know don't like high doses of GH, but still had distension. And it was because of digestive distress and issues and diseases, not because of the GH. So distension doesn't just come from one thing. It's a culmination of things.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm getting at, is it's more so the diet and digestive factors, and then the GH, exacerbates that and turns into issue. Because I personally, obviously I haven't seen as many protocols as you guys have, but I've seen open protocols, class protocols, and I've seen men's physique protocols. And I've seen in many men's physique protocols them use high amounts of GH and insulin, which surprised more than I've seen open and classic guys in a lot of cases. And those guys obviously have super small, tight waist.
Because they're not eating super big.
Exactly.
I think in summary, a precursor in terms of controlling things is always going to be gut health. If you can manage that, and we're paying more attention to it now as science advances and people actually are looking into why people are getting diseases and are they manageable, things like that. If that prevails and that is A1, then I think it allows you, okay, let me use growth hormone, let me use that higher dosages. Right now, I guess simultaneously, you take an individual, there's something called patience that a lot of us lack sometimes in terms of how quickly you can grow. You can only put on so much muscle so fast. I don't care. I'll use myself. When I started working with Phil, I want to be a bodybuilder. I really want to put on a lot of size. And he told me I asked him, how long is it going to take me to lift a certain way? A long time. How long is it going to take me to look a certain way? A long time. I said, okay, Phil, I'm willing to do whatever I have to do. Money's not an issue. Just tell me. And you were always very real with time is the most important factor. And then checking the boxes daily for an extended period of time, of which you probably don't want to wait. But that's the reality, especially if you don't have the genetics. So I think when you have someone that's not willing to be patient, then they start to run the risk. And again, going back to the fact that number one, as you touched on, Sebastian, if someone is not paying attention to what they're eating and they're eating a lot of inflammatory foods, now any dose of growth hormone is going to cause an issue on top of the fact that they're not willing to be patient. Then they're going to see it exacerbates everything. And then you really see it, right? So I've seen people use higher dosages. You wouldn't even know. And then I've seen people use very little for short periods of time. And I'm just like, what the hell happened to you? And it's just I can't stop eating. I'm trying to get big. Okay, well, you got fat. That's what you did, and you ruined your physique because you're 10 pounds heavier on stage, but your waist is 2 inches bigger. Guess what? You look the same, right? There's no improvements that were made. So I just wanted to kind of add that factor in because I think it's important.
No, those are all great points. And me and Kyle, actually, we both know one person we can think of in particular. We're not going to name this person, don't ask. That was impatient, like he said, and decided to really bang those doses. And we watched the waistline grow, but we also watched the muscles grow out of control and the strength grow out of control. And, thankfully the person was able to reverse some of those effects, after the fact. But, we've literally watched it happen, and everybody here watching this probably watched it happen. So yes, like he said, people do get impatient and they just want to bang these doses. Now I'll share something that, I don't mind sharing is, one of the things I like to do to mitigate this is I do bursts. So we have to think in terms of what are we trying to get out of the GH, right? Well, we established that we're trying to get body composition control, but we're also trying to get cell division, right? We're trying to get extra muscle cells. So you don't have to do that linear. Once you get new muscle cells, now they still have to mature, they still have to differentiate, they still have to grow. So that takes time. So what I like to do is short blasts. So the waistline won't get too out of control, and you don't have to sit there and hang on edge and monitor your waistline all year long. I can just bang 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks of a very high dose. We know that we got some cell division, maybe not a ton, but we've got some. So now we can pull off of that, grow those, and then determine how much more we need moving forward. Now, that's something I would do with a classic guy if I was worried about him trying to grow and I didn't want him on GH. I would use the minimal amount possible. So I would do a little blast, and then we would grow. And then if we hit another wall, we'd do another blast, and then we would grow. And then once we were done with that, I would never use GH with that person again until they're older age and you need to replace that, obviously, but it would be a very low dose. But no, like Kyle said, impatience is one of the biggest culprits of this happening. And, people just don't want to be patient, and it ruins a lot of careers. It actually banged me up a little bit because I was very, very impatient. I wanted to get there now. So I was eating more, I was training longer, I was training more, I was beating the life out of my body. And I had to do things to grow because I didn't have the best genetics. So I was already a very hard trainer. So now imagine somebody who's an extremely hard trainer, adding more volume, more sets, more frequency. I beat my body into submission, and it just stopped responding. If you look at my pictures from 2016 to 2017, you'll notice my arms shrank drastically. So I had shoulder injuries, so my triceps atrophied. So I paid for that. That happens. And you don't want to end up in that scenario. So like Kyle said, patience is one of the most important things. Look at what he's doing with his client, Anton, now. That kid probably could have jumped into a pro show right away. But he emphasized quality, health, recovery. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. What did you tell him to make him understand to be patient, knowing that he probably could do well in a pro show right away?
So, the main thing coming right out, right, the first thing people wanted is we could have probably pushed for like an invite to the Arnold, right? He could have been, because he's got that popularity, it would have been super exciting, see how he stacks up. And he probably because we got him peeled, right? So he can hold his own. When you're lean, you can stand next to anyone, especially if they're fat. You make them look fat. So the ultimate thing was, hey man, you're 19, right? You don't even know your ass from your hand, right? You're a baby. You're just getting into this. So my thing is always, I guess I never want to be the reason someone hates bodybuilding because I pushed them so hard. But at the same time, it was more of, look what we accomplished. You want to do this for the long haul. You want to be that man. Let's mature a little bit, right? Let's really come off things. And again, going back to the first episode for the guys that we did together, I think episode 38 maybe of Sebastian's podcast, we talked about the reverse and how a lot of my guys I have come off, right? For some, sure, they do stay on. But again, you consider someone's genetics, someone's potential, their age, their experience. And that conversation that I had with Anton was more of, we need to do the right things now. As exciting as it would have been, cool, man. I have you in the Arnold. You're a 19-year-old. That helps me. You're a walking billboard, right? That's going to drive my coaching through the roof. I don't care about that because I care about his health and him being able to be a Mr. I think he's got potential to be a top 5 Olympian for sure in the next few years. However, if we don't play our cards right and we start going about it the wrong way, and as any kid would, he's asked me, hey, can we growth hormone insulin? Is it really helpful? No, not yet, bro. We don't need it yet, because at some point when we get to that top level, I want to have the ability to say, now we can go somewhere even further if we need it. So again, I think going back to the patience thing, I don't mean to keep harping on it, but I can't hammer that home enough of how important that becomes. And then how thankful most people are looking back. Hey, thank you very much, because I was in the wrong state of mind, especially post show. The first thing most people want to do if they lose, right? I've lost a show, Sebastian, you lost. Usually you're super motivated. I'm hungry. I want to slam drugs. I want to slam food. I want to get big. Eventually that falls off, whether it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. You got to get healthy. And then it's like, okay, where do I go from there? And again, you could be perfect for an entire year. You could only grow so much muscle. That's just the reality. Does it mean you take triple the dosage, you're going to get triple the results? Absolutely not. It doesn't work that way. And if it did, everyone would look like Nick. It'd be that easy, So that's the main thing, is just being patient and not pushing the envelope when it comes to the growth hormone right away. I think certain age groups it's not really needed, to say the least. Just being smart about it.
And just to stay, we're going to get back on topic, but I just want to add real quick. especially in classic, taking your time to add muscle at the right rate and put it in the right places and make sure it's quality is going to raise your ceiling. It's going to make your potential higher at the end if you're patient and you're smart, and it's going to give you more longevity. But again, like you said, the problem is people are impatient. How many people only see who's currently doing well and who's currently competing? How many next Mr. Olympias did we have that we probably can't even remember their names right now because they took the wrong road?
Yeah. I think the patience thing, I mean, obviously everybody wants instant gratification, but you see a lot of these guys make these insane transformations in short periods of times, and people just don't take into consideration like other people's genetics, and they always compare and contrast. They see somebody like, Keon's transformation in 1 year and they're like, oh shit, that's possible. So, how can I do that now? It's like, you're not going to do that. It doesn't matter what you do. It's not happening for you.
Yeah. There's always behind the scenes things that people don't know, right? Oftentimes, even some of the top guys that have good genetics, they got there maybe not taking very much at all, whether you want to believe it or not, or they got there, they cheat on their diet all the time, right? And that's the reason you see sometimes people pull out of shows because they can't follow the diet. They might be really muscular, but they're always dropping out. One person comes to mind. I don't know if you guys, maybe the same person comes to mind, but he's huge. I've seen him every year prep for the last 3 years. He's supposed to do nationals, always a front runner, and he always pulls out of the show.
I know who you're talking about.
Hey, whenever you do a show, let me know because I'm not putting anyone in it. If I was competing, I'm not doing the show because I know I can't do that. It's impossible. It's not physically possible. But luckily, Burst can't get to the show, right? So I think it just comes down to, there's a lot of factors in terms of being a really good bodybuilder. But again, if you're talking about putting on muscle, it helps, going back to the main topic here of growth hormone, right? So
yeah. So I think we covered a good amount of negatives regarding growth hormone. Insulin resistance can be a byproduct. Digestive issues exacerbating that. Skin thickness, obviously, really bad if you're especially in classic physique. Are there any other negatives that you think would come alongside growth hormone?
Well, like you said, elevated blood pressure from the water retention can happen, which can have a cascade effect of a number of different things. High blood pressure is a killer. That's something I think that not enough people do in bodybuilding. For all the listeners here, actually, I just bought this. This is it looks like my battery died. This is a blood pressure watch. It's pretty new. It's called the BP Doctor, blood pressure doctor. But I like to wear it, and I like to monitor my blood pressure. And bodybuilders should be checking their blood pressure at least a couple times a week, and most don't. And that leads to a lot of adverse effects. And then once you start having blood pressure effects, negative, then the things that you take that cause those problems start to enhance that, and they cause it even more at a faster rate than it normally would have had you not had that previous issue. So once it starts, it gets worse and worse and worse really quick. But it has a buildup effect. So you want to stop it from happening completely. And I think that if all the listeners here that are listening to this, every single one of you need to be checking your blood pressure at least a couple of times a week at different points in the day to make sure that it's not elevating, because it's going to slowly creep up on you. And then, when people catch high blood pressure, oh shit, well, I'm on medication. Yeah, but you didn't realize it was high for 2 years and there's a lot of damage already done.
Yeah, a couple other negatives, Sebastian, if that's okay. I think talking about like hands, carpal tunnel, right, things like that, really prevalent. I've used growth hormone, right? Surprise, okay? I can tell you, it bothers me for sure compared to 10 years ago. And that's not just lifting. It's like physically, I can't do certain things with my hand that I was able to do previously. When we talk about females, something very distinct can happen to their face when they're using growth hormone, because believe it or not, a lot of females are using growth hormone as well. So those are negatives, I'd say, as well, when they're changing the structure of your body.
Like you said, it can affect bone growth too. Didn't Jay Cutler say his shoe size went up 2 sizes?
Yeah, I believe hands and feet that have been reported scientifically. I think there's literature out there. So this is not like us just, hey, we took this many growth.
Yeah, but one of the legends of our sport himself said his shoe size went up 2 sizes, like in his adulthood. So like that's clear example right there. That it can cause accelerated abnormal bone growth. You've got to be careful with some of those things. But listen, we have actually somebody right here who hasn't even mentioned potential side effects of GH that had a really big issue. Actually, I pointed the wrong way.
Sebastian. Oh, me? Yeah, I'm allergic to it, but that was a very rare case. Yeah, it took a lot of digging for me to figure that out.
Potential side effect.
Yeah. That could be a side effect of any medication, though.
And then how long did that linger once you came off? Because I was involved in the process of recovering. I remember.
It took over 3 months because I had the immune complexes in my body. So that's how long it took for my body to clear it out of my system. So that put me out of the gym
there's a lot of
3
different
months.
things that it can do negative. There's a lot of things that it can do positively, but you've got to be careful with it. Elevating IGF-1 or doing anything that's abnormal to the body is going to have effects. There's a new medication out for dogs, for example, that's undergoing research, where it supposedly extends the lifespan of larger dogs. So how does it do that? It does it by reducing IGF-1. So, take that how you want, but the way that they're extending the dog's lifespan is by reducing IGF-1. And what are we doing with GH? Well, we're enhancing it, aren't we?
Wait. Because isn't growth hormone like referred to as the youth drug? Like people will take that.
Well, it's anti-aging visually and healing wise because it upregulates collagen synthesis. So it's going to reduce wrinkling. It's going to reduce folds in your face. It's going to reduce sagging skin. You're going to have healthier, puffier, shinier, nicer looking skin. And so visually, yeah, it's going to help. And any injuries and things that are wrong, yes, that's going to help, but it's still growth hormone. It's going to accelerate a lot of different things. So, I haven't read a lot of the research on that project, but the whole premise behind it is lowering IGF is what they're crediting with extending the dog's life.
Okay. Let me ask you, why do we take growth hormone and not just straight IGF-1 like Increlex?
Well, one of the reasons why we take growth hormone is because we're trying to mimic what the body does as closely as possible, right? So there's a system of processes that have to happen in order to get the desired results that we want, right? We want to undergo proliferation, which I mentioned is cell division, and then we want to undergo differentiation. So there's different mechanisms and there's different types of IGF-1 that happen systematically in order for that to happen. And the only way we're really going to get that, and the only way we've been able to duplicate that right now, is by administering exogenous growth hormone and then stimulating that process throughout our body. One of those variations is MGF, for example, right? Mechanical growth factor. We still have not been able to produce an exogenous effective version of that. It was very, very popular on the peptide sites years ago, and there was all this hype behind it. And now you see it's not even sold anymore. Nobody uses it. Nobody does anything with it. Why? Because we haven't been able to create an effective version, because the effective version is pretty much localized, not systemic. So it's produced localized within the muscle. So if you don't have a systematic process of how this happens, you're not going to get the overall desired outcome. So what you can do is you can take IGF to enhance how growth hormone is working. And you can definitely take IGF if you want to heal quicker and grow a little quicker and have results. But it's ultimately not going to have the same effect as taking growth hormone itself. Now, stacking it obviously is going to have a synergistic effect. You're going to amplify the effects. You're going to get the best of both worlds. But again, you're going to get all the side effects too.
Well, IGF-1 is what is primarily responsible for cell proliferation, no?
Well, there's a number of different types, and without getting into an entire science lesson here that's going to confuse everybody, let's just say there's a systematic process of different types that have to be produced in a certain sequence in order to get all of the desired results that we want, right? So we're going to get cell division, then we're going to get differentiation and a number of different things that are going to happen. So there's a lot of different types that we can discuss that are produced systemically and localized. So again, we're gonna go way off on a tangent and confuse everybody, and you do need a little bit of a base education to understand this. Otherwise, people are going to be Googling a bunch of things and getting confused. So to simplify, there's a systematic process of different types that have to happen in a sequence to get the desired results.
Okay, now how does growth hormone directly increase lipolysis, free fatty acid mobilization?
Okay, well, again, without getting into a deep scientific lesson, because you keep asking me questions, you told me to keep this simple, and then you're asking me questions where it's nearly impossible to keep it simple without making this a 5-hour podcast. Now, remember, we have a lot of young listeners, too. Maybe we could put this in the notes or something for people who are interested in these answers. But what happens is once you administer GH, you do have an initial spike in lipolysis, which is release of fat into the bloodstream to be burned. And then to keep it simple, it shifts your body from a glucose-dependent or focused energy-producing machine into more of a fat-burning or fat-releasing lipolysis and burning and processing machine. So your body will preferentially use fat rather than glucose when you start administering GH. Now, that doesn't last for a super long time, which is why a lot of guys, I think even, I keep referring back to Jay Cutler, I think that he was doing 2 IUs every couple of hours in prep, or somebody did that, because they were trying to continually produce that effect. It's only for as long as it's active. It's not like you administer your GH in the morning and then all day you're a fat burning machine. Doesn't work.
Yeah. But I'm asking, I don't know if you can simplify this. What is the mechanism of action? Like, how yohimbine, it's like blunting norepinephrine release. So that's like what relates to the increased free fatty acid mobilization.
Well, yohimbine is actually an alpha 2 antagonist. So it basically shuts off the receptor that opposes fat release. Yes. So that's a very simple way to put it. Now, as far as the mechanisms in which GH stimulates fat release and fat loss, again, it's related to IGF-1. It's related to glucose metabolism. It's related to fat metabolism. Simplified. This is a tough one to simplify, honestly. And I don't know it well enough to make it understandable to the listeners, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I think
so. I don't want to confuse anybody. I don't want to give wrong information. So to be perfectly honest, I don't understand it well enough to simplify it.
Kyle, do you have an answer?
I think just high level, it encourages like the liver to release. Right, it's a more of a function that in our terms of our body. So I don't know the exact scientific breakdown of how it happens, but like anything, right, which is why we need a healthy liver for detoxification of hormones. All of these different things, it plays a role, right? So
liver plays a large role in lipolysis. People don't realize a lot of times. Like, I think I've told this story before. Sorry to interrupt, but I had a guy come to me who phenomenal physique, phenomenal genetics, couldn't get peeled for a show. Comes to me, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm about to be a hero. And then I get his blood work back, and his AST and ALT are the 400. And I had to explain to him that with the level of liver stress that you have, your body can't get as lean as you need to be because the liver plays a large role in lipolysis. And he tried anyway, it failed anyway. So for all of you guys at home, like to bang the drugs and like to bang the orals, and they think that I'm just being, health. I only use like orals typically in my preps the last 4 weeks. And a lot of people like to use 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. One of the reasons is because if I start damaging your liver and I create a lot of liver stress, it's harder to get leaner. It makes my job harder. And then I have to do more extreme things to get you lean. That's going to cause even more stress. So as Kyle said, yes, it's going to upregulate mechanisms in the liver that are related to lipolysis because that plays a major part.
Okay, now, when we're using growth hormone in an off season, you say it's primarily for that hyperplasia effect. In prep, it's primarily for composition, that lipolysis effect. Now, those are the two primary reasons why we're using them in those settings.
Typically, yes, or that's what people believe.
Now, what would be the difference in approaches in an off season versus a prep, and how you time and when you take the growth hormone, or are they the same?
See, in off season, I like more bolus doses simply because I like those extreme effects, right? I often like to use a pre-workout. Why? Because I actually like the water retention for a workout. It's going to lead to better pumps, better intramuscular water retention and leverage. So it's going to ultimately make you stronger. It's going to be in the window where we need to recover the most. So I typically like to do bolus doses around the workout, whereas in contest prep, like I said, the duration of action for the GH is going to determine, what your body is preferentially using for fuel. So if you're doing GH in the morning, you're not still a fat burning machine at night. So you want more frequent administration. So I like to break the doses up in prep, whereas I like more bolus doses off season. Kyle?
No, I think you hit it on the head. I think sometimes when it gets into growth hormone, again, we're speaking in terms of people that aren't just using 1 IU growth hormone, right? So we could talk about maybe the recommended foods if we'd like, but in terms of someone using more than 1.8 IUs, right? Breaking it up, I'd say in prep. Usually, I guess I ask people, or I ask myself, why are we using it? What is the goal, right? Ultimately, putting in the morning, right? More, I guess, emphasizing more of a fat burning type of response, I guess, with growth hormone in the equation, right? Pre-workout, as you mentioned, you said it perfectly. I feel like we beat dead drums. We say it all the time, but that helps performance, right? Increased performance. Hey, I'm all for it, especially when it helps recovery. That's the goal. Have someone training properly. It's something that's going to amplify that. Excellent. And then there's also, depending on how much you're taking it, maybe 2 hours into sleep, right? Just when your natural secretion is usually occurring is another great time. So in terms of, if you had to pick one time to take it, you would consider, am I trying to take it for recovery? Am I trying to take it for performance? Am I trying to take it for fat burning? Which of the three? And then go from there. If you have unlimited access to it, then I guess, you have different options.
Okay, so say you're restrained on income, you want to use growth hormones. One of those reasons, each one: fat burning, muscle growth, recovery. When would you place each of those dosages?
So if I'm doing fat burning, I'm doing first thing in the morning, right? That's going to be my primary time, fasted in the morning, ideally.
Before cardio?
Yes, that's when I would like to take it, right? That's just for growth hormone, right? There are other things you throw in the equation, but we'll just keep it very simple. In terms of for performance, pre-workout. Now, depending on the dose we're taking, you don't want to take it with food, right? So maybe we're taking it, if we're taking, I'm sure we're going to tie the insulin together. We could take it with insulin prior to our pre-workout meal, depending on, we're trying to increase the absorption of our meal, load us for the workout, etc. Or potentially you could take it before the workout, right? Maybe 30 minutes after pre-workout meal, 45 minutes after your pre-workout meal. If we're just using growth hormone by itself, right? For recovery purposes, you have post-training, there's a window. There's additionally, before bed or the 2 hours into bed, ideally.
So he got pretty advanced with the dosing protocols and the reasoning. Just to clarify for the listeners, try to simplify as much as possible. The reason why he said don't take it with food is because of what we referred to earlier is the insulin resistance. So it's going to affect how you process that meal and absorb that meal. So you want to take it outside the window, at which point those nutrients are hitting you with, again, what he just said is unless you use insulin, because you're going to have to compensate for that. So you want to try to avoid that if at all possible. So yes, the times that you're trying to burn body fat, like before your fasted cardio, obviously you'd like a dump in fat, you'd like some lipolysis to happen, right? Throughout the night when your anaerobic threshold is lowest, obviously you're burning a higher percentage of fat without getting into a complex of a lesson on that. So middle of the night's a good time, depending on how you like to do that. But using it throughout the day generally is a pretty good idea as long as you're using it away from food, so you're not affecting the meal. Now, 2 IUs is not going to affect your meal, but we're not talking about 2 IUs here. We're talking about something that's going to have an effective dose. And yes, that's going to impact how your body processes the meal. So we have to take into consideration side effects as well. If you start to impact the way your body is absorbing meals, it starts to create insulin resistance. Well, your body's going to pulse insulin higher to compensate, right? So what happens with that is electrolyte retention. You get electrolyte retention, you get elevated blood pressure. So you could actually start to cause problems, through a system of processes if you don't use it correctly. So again, people just think throw GH in, use it however, and whatnot. And now there's a fallacy that people think that because people always say growth hormone levels are highest when you're fasted, right? And they think that's why you don't take it with a meal, because it's going to not work. You're taking exogenous GH. It's not your natural. You're taking GH. That's like people soy raises your estrogen, but you're on 25 mg of aromas. I don't know how people have come to these conclusions. But yeah, that's a big fallacy that people think that the GH is not going to work if you take it with food. No, that's complete horseshit. It's just going to affect how you process the meal and then.
Want this back. Why exactly is it affecting how you're processing the meal? What is happening that is affecting the absorption? It's happening as soon as you take it, you're becoming more resistant.
It happens very quick because it's due to a number of receptors and systematic processes in the body, liver being one, like you said. So if you start to cause any type of insulin resistance, you're going to get a higher pulse of insulin. You get a higher pulse of insulin, you're going to get more water retention. Get more water retention, you have more electrolyte retention, you can elevate your blood pressure. Now, if it's not a factor, okay, you're fine, you're young. But it can. So great point Kyle made is, why are you using it, right? So we can sometimes, like I said, I normally wouldn't have my classic guys take it, and then I said until they get older. Why? Because your collagen synthesis downregulates into your 30s and then mid 30s and late 30s, and you get injured a lot more frequently. I saw that firsthand. So you want to replace what you're losing so that you're not getting injured in your later years. So even if I have somebody off of GH on a very low dose in their late 20s, early 30s, I'm going to climb that dose as they get older because they need it for the recovery, not for the muscle growth, not for the fat loss, just so they're not getting hurt.
So is your blood sugar always going to be higher after you administer growth hormone?
Well, it's going to be genetically dependent. I can give you an example in a conversation that I had with John Meadows, rest in peace, one of my mentors, somebody that I care about dearly, was the fact that when I would take GH, it would initially elevate my blood glucose. But then once the IGF conversion took place, my blood glucose would crash. So I said to John, dude, all the literature says it's going to spike your blood glucose, but I'm crashing. And then we had that discussion that it takes a period of time before the IGF conversion starts to commence and then starts to elevate. And then when that happens, that elevation that I was getting was now going the opposite way and crashing. Because I'm hypersensitive and a very fast metabolism, that was a problem for me. So what I was doing is I was taking my GH, 30 minutes pre-workout, and I was falling asleep in the car because my blood sugar was crashing, because I had already digested my pre-workout meal. And then I just wanted my IGF elevation, but my blood glucose already wasn't very high. So what happened was I spiked and then I crashed and I would fall asleep in the car. So we had that conversation and pretty much came to that conclusion that that's exactly what was happening. So then I started checking, and I checked very, very frequently. I'm talking about every couple minutes, for a period of time. And I saw that's exactly what was happening.
So it takes about 30 minutes to take effect.
IGF elevation, I believe, starts to happen within 20 minutes.
Because you also know people use growth hormone solely for a hunger factor too.
Well, that's because your blood glucose is going to crash. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
But GH isn't always going to increase your hunger. People think that that's linear and that's across the board, and that's another fallacy. A lot of things are passed around by people that are not true across the board. They're only true circumstantial. Because what do we know about insulin, for example, right? What's cool and popular right now? Ozempic, right? What does Ozempic do? Well, it makes your body release more insulin, right? So what does releasing more insulin do? It's blunting your hunger. So if you start taking a bunch of GH and you start causing insulin resistance, what does insulin resistance do? I mentioned it a moment ago. It's going to start to elevate the amount of insulin you release. If you have high insulin, it's going to kill your hunger, isn't it? So it's not true across the board that it's going to increase your hunger. That's a fallacy. BS. It's circumstantial.
I've never gotten increased hunger from growth hormone when I took it. I took straight GHRP6, never did anything. MK677 never affected my appetite whatsoever.
Another reason why they can say that it helps with hunger is because it helps control body composition. So if you're leaner, you're going to be hungrier.
Mm-hmm.
But you could do that without GH.
Yeah, of course. So cover the times to take it. I'm going to segue into the different types of insulin now. I do have a.
We're gonna try to keep this as simple as possible because this one can go deep too.
I've got something here that I'm gonna pull up here. Let me see if I can pull it up.
While you're pulling that up quickly, Phil, I get this question asked a lot because growth hormone can be pricey. I don't want to talk about the types of growth hormone. Okay, we'll cover that later. An effective dose of growth hormone. Do you think it's worth it? If someone said, "Hey, I can afford 1 IU," do you think it's worth it? No, right?
Waste of money.
Right.
And I could say that pretty goddamn confidently that that's a waste of money. I personally don't think, typically in the past, everybody would throw a generic number out that 4 IU is the minimum effective dose, right? But we got to understand, everybody's different. We all have different production. We all have different levels. A lot of you guys probably both know Gabe, my client. Well, I know Sebastian. I know you know well. You know very well. He used to go to your gym. You saw how peeled Gabe is. Gabe's body doesn't produce growth hormone. So what is a result of his body not producing growth hormone? His skin is paper thin. I've posted pictures online, and listen, I've had pros in person. I've had Antoine Valant there. I've had pros see him up close, and they're like, "This is not what it looked like in pictures online." You've got to see it in person to appreciate it. You could see his fibers moving under his skin throughout his body as he walks. His skin's so thin because he has decreased collagen synthesis. So, he's an MD. I don't want to get into any details, but, you want to put somebody's IGF into the right range, right? So if somebody doesn't produce a lot, it's just going to put them into a normal range, right? If somebody already produces a lot, it's going to put them into a higher range. So it's going to be dependent on the person, dependent on what you need. It's a good idea to run your IGF-1 level, see where they're at, and see where you think they should be, where you need them to be. And then, you go from there. But a lot of people can't do that. It's expensive to test. They don't want to do that. And it's not always necessary. So you, like we said before, you could pretty much, figure a safe dose. If I'm trying to grow somebody, I'm not doing 4 IUs. I'm not going to waste my time with 4 IUs. 4 IUs is more of a recovery and an injury prevention dose for me, like a baseline for somebody who's older. If you can't run 6 to 8, we're not going to even bother.
Okay. I sent you something. Check your phone. I can't pull it up here, so I'll try and look it up. I'll put it up in post, but this is what I'm referring to. Is this
question to us?
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know all these by heart.
So I was go over these: rapid, short, intermediate, long. I guess
I think if we go over each of these individually, it's going to be confusing for people. So I think that we should just go with 3. I think we should go with short acting, medium, long, and not name the types because it's going to start to confuse people.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Okay, let's say rapid, short, and long. Okay, what are
because like
different uses?
medium would be N, it would be R, long would be Lantis, there'd be numerous types. If we're getting into short, we can get into Apidra, we can get into Humalog, Novolog, we get all those different types. So let's just say fast, medium, long.
Okay, so rapid, short, long. Okay, I never even honestly have seen people utilize this intermediate.
Oh, I've used it back in the day because what the thing is, in the United States, that's the only one that's over the counter.
Now you can get Novolin, Humulin, over the counter.
Yeah, Walmart.
You can walk into
I
Walmart.
did not know that. Well, that's not the way
Humulin
it was. If that's true, I'm going after this.
Yeah. So let's start with rapid, right? Rapid, what would be the primary application behind rapid?
Okay, so again, with these fast-acting insulins, I want everybody to understand they all have a little bit different onset times, peak times, and durations, okay? So we're going to give generalized numbers here. These are not exact because there's too many different ones to discuss that are different. So if we're talking about a fast-acting insulin, we're thinking of a Humalog, Novolog, Apidra, things like that. You're going to have an onset of somewhere between 10, 15, and 20 minutes. Now, here's something people don't understand, and you would only understand this if you actually know diabetics, type 1 diabetics. I actually grew up with one since I was very young, so I learned about insulin before I even knew if bodybuilding existed. And they'll tell you, like, you'll see these, onset is 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. No, you inject a fast-acting insulin, starts working right away. It just doesn't have its peak effect right away, but it starts working immediately. So keep that in mind. So it's going to depend on the speed and the dose, how drastically and how quickly it affects you. But insulin starts working right away, no matter what you administer. So don't get that confused. But typically, they say the onset is going to be when the peak effects start to take effect. So that's somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. So in that period of time, if you inject a high enough dose, you risk a crash. So what's going to happen then is you're going to have a second peak. So the second peak is typically around 45, 50 minutes. So that's why they say when you inject a fast-acting insulin and then you cover those carbohydrates, you are not in the clear yet because its duration is actually going to be around 2 hours. So once you've injected something like Humalog or Novolog, you're not safe for 2 hours. And I tell my people, I don't want you mowing the lawn. I don't know what you're doing. I want you monitoring your blood glucose until I know we're safe. And that's it. Because I don't want any incidents. I've never had a client hospitalized. I don't want any of these guys to be the first. And this can kill you. Just to be clear, everybody knows this can kill you if you screw it up. Kill you in one shot. I actually dated a type 1 diabetic too. I saved her life twice because I woke her up and she used to get pissed off at me every morning for waking her up. And one morning I shook her and she didn't respond. Well, luckily, I knew what to do. If it was somebody who didn't know what to do, she'd be dead. So, and just for the listeners, somebody is unresponsive, you put some icing or sugar under their tongue. And that's what's going to bring them back. But there's a lot of misunderstanding behind insulin, and people don't understand it. It's not something to play with. This can kill you, and it can kill you in one shot. You make one mistake, you're dead. One. And any of us who have gone hypo, pretty much everybody who's used insulin has made a little mistake at some point and gone hypo. But we're all alive because we knew to have a Gatorade on hand, to have an orange juice on hand, some kind of real fast sugar to fix it. But it is not fun. You get ravenously hungry. You will pour sweat like you just ran a marathon in 110-degree weather. You will shake uncontrollably. You won't be able to think. And if your blood sugar is low enough, you won't neurologically function. You'll be goo-gooing and gagaing and not processing speech. So you don't want that to happen. So you need to have a blood glucose monitor. You need to learn how to use it. You need to monitor things accurately. Back in the day, we didn't do this. Back 20 years ago, nobody had a blood glucose monitor. We were guessing. Well, okay, we'll just make sure you cover this. But we can be more accurate today because we're a lot more responsible and more educated. If you don't learn how to use a blood glucose monitor, don't you dare touch insulin. And then you need to understand how to use it, and you need to have an expert teach you how to use it. And if you don't have an expert teach you how to use it, you're probably going to have an event at some point, some type of mistake. I can't tell you how many times people thought that they covered the carbs, right? But they just worked out, their metabolism's running off the wall, maybe their adrenaline's pumping, they burn through those carbs, and then they crash. But I ate the right amount of carbohydrates. Doesn't matter. You need to be responsible, you need to be smart, because it doesn't always work out the way you think it will mathematically on paper. And I want to make that clear.
Okay, so using fast-acting insulin, what would be the reason why you would use rapid over short, right? Because they're both pretty similar. I mean,
Well, I know
it's
Kyle
like a
was going to
slightly.
this one earlier, so I'll let him take it.
Say that again.
What would be the reasoning behind using rapid over short? Because they're pretty similar. Short is obviously you have a little bit more time, but it's not that drastic.
Sure, but usually, so again, we want to optimize the diet ideally, right? So we have someone that's following a diet. Okay, where is there opportunity to make things more efficient, right? Usually, very commonplace. Someone starting out with insulin is sometime in that peri-workout window, before pre-workout meal, maybe before the gym. Hell, it could be during the workout if you have someone that's very meticulous and follows directions. Again, you need someone that is willing to be patient and follow directions and not do things that are I don't know.
And you've got to be immensely accurate to do that.
Yes, and I think that's where the 10 grams of carbs, because the people didn't really monitor glucose levels, so it's a safe measure for sure, right? Because there's been times in which you don't need that much at all. It's too much, and it's proven because now your levels have dumped, right? It was just too much. But the reason I would use rapid is, again, I'm trying to amplify certain meals. So that's the most effective way, right? Is it the safest way? No, it could be very, very dangerous for sure. However, depending on what the goal is at hand in bodybuilding, insulin doesn't just say, hey, I'm going to look for the carbohydrates and I'm going to shuttle them for you. So I used a practical example. Okay, I had a client giving them insulin. We were using some Lantis. We were using some human. We were using different ones, long, medium, short, right, depending. And the person would always look at their carbohydrates, and I was comfortable enough to trust them to say, hey, 100 grams of carbs this meal. What I didn't explain was, hey, you cannot use Alexia sweet potato fries because there's 5 grams of fat every 25 carbs, right? So now we have a person that's taking in 35 grams of fats. And again, as I touched on, insulin shuttles nutrients. It does not just say, hi, carbohydrates, I just want to pick you guys. It will take anything, and you will get fat very, very quickly. So that's what I mean by insulin can ruin things. And sometimes it's better off left untouched because of that being the case, okay? So that's why I use the short acting, or I would use it to optimize certain meals.
And that's actually a very fair and very good point about the fats. Now, another point to add onto that about the fats is fats slow down transient absorption as well. So if you take a fast-acting insulin and it hits you faster than the carbohydrates get into your system, you're still going to crash. You might have eaten 100 grams of carbohydrates. You didn't get 100 grams of carbohydrates in your system because the fat impeded and slowed down the absorption process of that, right? Where do we absorb glucose? In our mouths and then in our intestinal tracts. There's a delay through the stomach. So if you have transit slowed down, you might have eaten 100 grams of carbs. You only got 40 or 50. If you took 10 IUs of insulin, you're going to crash. So yes, like he said, you could store the fat, screw up body composition. You could also slow motility and absorption and screw that up as well and have a big crash. You could theoretically take your 10 grams of carbs per IU of insulin. You could still die because you screwed up. Now, odds are you're not going to in that range, but yes, you can. And again, another point that Kyle made is the 10 gram of carb per 1 IU of insulin rule that we had was coverage, like you said, a safeguard. We know we're pretty safe in that range, but that's not uniform for everybody. It's going to depend on their metabolic rate, their genetics, what they just did. Like I can tell you for a fact, after a leg workout, your blood sugar is going to crash a lot faster than it is after a chest workout. So if you try to match up the same amount of carbohydrates, it's not going to happen. Like you'll see in some of my programs, I might put 10 IUs of insulin after upper body day. I might put 10 IUs of insulin after leg day, but you're always going to see higher carbohydrates on the leg day. Why? Because I know you're going to burn through more of it, and I don't want you to crash. See, for me, for example, the 10 IU per gram of carb doesn't work for me because if I just train legs, I need more about 15 to 20 grams of carbs per IU, or I will crash. I crash without using insulin. So I have to be very careful on that front. Whereas somebody else, they might be resistant. They might not even need that much. And if you do too many, and if somebody is resistant and whatnot, and they don't even, then they say it's 5 grams of carbs per IU, and you start feeding them 10, they're going to get fat. So you have to know where that person's sensitivity is, where that person's genetics are, where their metabolic rate is at that point, what they just trained, what the demands are on the body, and then dose appropriately. And this is, again, back to understanding physiology and understanding insulin. And coaches program this wrong all the time. I can tell you there's probably 99 out of 100 coaches that probably use 1 or 2 protocols for everyone. And that's completely asinine because that's not how it works.
And one thing
now, again, I wanted to also add, I'm sorry, as far as the long acting, the longer you are exposed to the insulin, you can also be desensitized. And that's why I don't like the Lantis. And that's why people often have to do mini diets after using Lantis because of the fat accumulation. And they think that's just, part of playing the game, and it's not. It's because you started getting insulin resistant over a period of time because you're exposed to it too long. I want it in, do its job, and get the heck out.
Yeah. What are you going to say, Kyle?
I was just going to touch on, because we're speaking of carbohydrates, and I'm sure some of our listeners are going to be eager to try, okay, I want to use short-acting, rapid-acting insulin, and let me just eat some carbs. Pay attention to the carbs that you're intaking, right? So there's a difference between 100 grams of carbs from fruit or a Gatorade versus 100 grams of carbs from sweet potato. There's a drastic difference, right, in terms of how you're going to digest something. So I just want to point out, always be mindful of these things, and it just there's not one hat fits all when it comes to this, and that's why it's very safe to start with a very low dose, monitor your glucose levels, and understand, like, okay, this, you can always add more. You can never take away, right? You just need time to fix things if you mess something up. And the last thing someone wants to do, as you mentioned, is sometimes at some point if someone is using insulin, they're going to have an episode where maybe, one of those days their metabolism's ripping through food. They perhaps got sidetracked with a phone call, didn't eat quick enough. When you experience going hypo, you ruin your work. Your workout is kind of shot. You're not going to have a good workout. Strength is tank. So you compromise a lot of things. So that's why it's very. I look at it. It's safe in terms of not messing up someone's body and accumulating fat if things are followed directly. However, it's also very risky if you're not paying attention, and it happens to anyone, right? So it's not saying, hey, the meathead shouldn't take insulin. It could happen to me before, right? It doesn't mean I did something wrong, but I got sidetracked. It was just a timing thing, and you learn from your mistakes, and you realize, like, as you touched on, don't go mow the lawn, don't go do 10 other things, because depending on what's going on, your body's very different, right? If you have a lot of stress in your life, what happens to cortisol levels and your insulin levels, right? It has nothing to do with insulin. So everything kind of ties together when it works with your body. But when we're programming insulin, it's not just a template. Hey, take the 5 IUs with this meal, you'll be good. People experience very drastic different things.
And I just want to emphasize one of the things that he said that I missed was, again, the digestive speed of what you're eating. Now, the fat can slow down the transit, but like he said, I missed this point, is the type of carbohydrate you eat digests at different speeds. So if you're eating a yam sweet potato, which is going to digest pretty slow, it might not hit you in time, even if you don't have fat in the diet. So again, very good point. Make sure you know what you're eating and the speed at which it's going to hit you, because that can drastically impact, what's going to happen.
Of course. Now, I'm still a little stuck on this here between the difference between rapid and short, because to me, it just seems like it's just a timing difference, right? If I want to utilize rapid or short, like a Humulin R versus Humalog versus for a pre-workout meal, it's just a difference between me taking it, 15 minutes before versus me taking it 45 minutes before, but it's going to get the same desired outcome, no?
All right, this is easy for me to simplify and put it basically bullet points. There's a number of key factors that we're thinking about. First of all, when you're talking about fast acting, you can have a higher spike. So the graph is going to look like this. I'm trying to stay on the screen. Versus if it's medium acting, it's going to have a little bit lower spike and longer duration. And then the long acting is going to have a very low spike and a longer duration. So we want peak effects, right? So we want it to hit us as hard as we intend for it to hit, and then get out of our system as fast as we can, because it's also a liability, right? The longer it's in our system, the longer we have to watch it. So I don't mind sharing this because this is going to help people. What I have my people do, so I'm going to give a specific example. Don't go copying this. This is not a one-size-fits-all protocol, but like post-workout, for example. I know the metabolism is burning fast. I know we're going to burn through that food, but I want to enhance uptake. So I will administer it post-workout and have them eat a meal. Now, what do? I have them start monitoring their blood glucose every 10 minutes, starting 20 minutes post-meal. And then the meal after the workout, they eat once their blood sugar drops under 90. So international people, it's 90 divided by 18 would be your number. So when they administer the insulin, blood glucose is obviously going to go up because you eat, and then it's going to start shuttling that glucose in the blood glucose. The glucose is going to drop. So I let them decide when they're going to eat their next meal, not based on 2 hours, not based on 3 hours, based on when their blood sugar comes back under 90. And there's always carbohydrates in that second meal too, because like I said, you're going to have 2 spikes, not 1. You're not clear because you ate that 1 meal of carbohydrates. You're going to need 2. even with fast acting. So they're going to eat their post-workout meal, and then starting 20 minutes after the meal, they're going to check 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and they're going to watch that blood glucose come down. And it's going to come down at different speeds every time, whether it's leg day, arm day, chest day, how much stress you're going through, how much volume is in your workout, all different factors. But they're going to eat once it comes back under 90, and that's almost always under 2 hours. So the food is processed. You don't have to follow this stupid 2-3 hour rule, none of that. But that's a good way for coverage, and that's a good way to know exactly, how to cover it is by monitoring your blood glucose. It's very, very important. I think that people don't do that. They make too many assumptions and they wait too long. So what you'll see often is people will take that insulin and they'll eat their post-workout meal, but then they'll crash before the next meal. Happens all the time. I bet you there's a bunch of people watching this going, that just happened to me because of your coach programmed your insulin wrong. I'm sorry. So that's a safer and more responsible way to monitor it.
Okay. So that's basically why we're using Rapid, is it's a safer
approach. It's a more potent response and it's less liability.
Okay. Yeah. I know that. I don't know if you want me to touch on the way that we used it in the off season.
You can talk about anything you'd like.
Yeah. So, I know we used it specifically for appetite, but we didn't use a lot. We weren't using it for more so a shuttling effect. So I would eat, and then after 2 hours, I would measure my blood glucose. And I think if it was above 90, we would take a small amount so that it comes down.
That's another way that I've used it. And I use that very sparingly. I only use that with very, very smart, dedicated, responsible people. Now, I did this project back in the day. I think it was 2019 with James Hollingshead. Before he became a big name, before he started doing really well in shows. When he linked up with me is when he started making first call out. But what we did was we started microdosing his insulin before meals in order to prime the body for digestion. Now, just had a debate with this online. People agree, people disagree, literature and whatnot. I'm pretty set on this, pretty set on my beliefs as far as when your blood sugar is lower, your body's going to be more receptive to food. So what we did was we took his diet that he was on and his program that he was on. We didn't change PEDs. We didn't change the foods. We didn't change the amounts. We changed nothing. All I did was stop meals from compounding. So 30 minutes before a meal, if his blood sugar was at 110, he would take 4 IUs of Humalog. And that would ensure that he was under 90 before the next meal. If he was at 100, we would take 3 IUs. If he was at 95, we might take 2. If he was under that, then we would just leave it alone. But I made sure that we were using insulin to put his blood sugar under 90 between meals. Now, mind you, I changed nothing. And his glutes started coming in over a period of 2-3 months. And he got so lean that we're like, screw it. We were going to do a later prep, but we're like, screw it, your glutes are in. Let's do a show. We did a 6-week prep and took third in, I want to say Spain, which was his best placing to date. So I think it was the first time second time he'd made first call out. We did the year before. But we learned some lessons with that. But 2019 season, first show, he ended up taking third, very first show. And we did it on a 6-week prep because doing that just got him leaner and made him bigger, just changing how his body responded to food. So yes, you could do it for that purpose too, to increase absorption, to increase basically by increasing the body's response to the food and elevating appetite a little bit. Listen, if your blood sugar is at 120 and you go to eat, you're going to struggle. If your blood sugar is at 90, even if you're not hungry, you start eating, you're going to notice it's easier to get that food in. And anybody here, I welcome you to try it. As far as not taking insulin, but checking your blood glucose and eating a meal at 120 or eating a meal at 90, and see the difference in how you digest the food, how hungry you are, how easy it is to get down. So yes, we microdosed it to prime the body for those meals. Now, I don't suggest you do that. That is not a beginner tactic.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as Lantis long-acting goes, I know you're against it. From what I've gathered, in most cases, it does just seem like you're putting a Band-Aid on things. I know, Kyle, you mentioned that you've used it before. So in what scenarios would you ever consider using a long-acting?
So I've used it when I'm really trying to focus on a body part, right? And it was more of an experiment of saying, okay, I'm going to really load this body part. The fat's going to be pretty low today because, again, I'm trying to mitigate what's actually being shuttled and absorbed.
So just one day.
Yes, and just a specific day. So it'd be like, hey, Mondays are leg days. I need to blow up your legs. We're doing it every 5th day. We're training legs. This is the diet specifically on this day, right? And again, there are times in which it's a valid question. Hey, why can't we do this every day? Well, there's a reason, right? It kind of ruins sensitivity for sure, and you only have a window where you can do it. Now, could you do it for 4 weeks? I guess it's an experiment, but if you want to be a guinea pig, I try not to be guinea pigs with people if I didn't do it myself. And I have never done that myself. So it's like uncharted waters to where you are asking questions like, hey, how are you feeling? What is your glucose levels? Are we getting results from this? How are your workouts? Because again, if you're taking insulin, you have the goal of optimizing absorption and recovery and all of these things. However, at the end of the day, if you're not doing what you need to do in the gym, you're not having good workouts, you're not going to get results, right? So you could be meticulous like the nerd and write everything down. But if you're not able to perform and it's, hey, I can't get any pumps, like I just feel like I go hypo all the time. There's a problem, right? There's a significant problem you have to address. So when I've used Lantis, which very, very seldom, it was specifically on a body part with the intention of, hey, I'm not using log every single meal. Or in this case, there was some other peri-workout insulin used, but that was the main goal there. And it was kind of more of not a last resort, but you can only eat so much and we're trying to expedite growth and it's just another opportunity to take it or option to take perhaps.
Okay. So do you think there's necessarily any real benefit to using that long acting on that day versus just using multiple shots of like a short acting for that day where you're trying to prioritize that muscle?
I can't say I personally, like Phil, maybe you can speak more to it, but I can't say I didn't see enough for me to say, yeah, you know what, I want to continue to use this. I have type 1 diabetics to where I'll see what they're told to use from their doctor and then, address things if necessary and try to work with the doctor to kind of understand and make them, because most of the time, again, when people are going to medical professionals, they're not experienced in terms of working with a bodybuilder, trying to have someone that's built to look a certain way on stage. That's not the goal. They're just trying to make sure the person can function through everyday life, right? So again, that's not a normal, you're not going to find literature behind it unless we find a collective group of people that want to sign their name and be in an experiment for the next 10 years of their life. So I didn't see enough from it to say, hey, Lantis is beneficial. It's actually could be quite dangerous because now you have someone that all day long they can't reach for the cookie or the excess stuff. They could, but again, you're starting to be detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you asked my opinion on this, and this is going to be one of the rare instances where I'm going to concede. And I always said that there's no circumstances that I would really like to use Lantis. I mean, there's some I'll use in an older population, which I'll explain in a second. But as far as for muscle growth itself, I typically don't like Lantis. But I'm going to concede here and say that was a great idea. That was very creative. It's very well thought out. And I do think that could be a good idea because it would lower overall blood glucose over the course of the day, which would make it easier to eat the meals, which would make the meals process better. And we could even segue into another point that we were going to make earlier. I don't want to get too complex and confusing on it, but the insulin being present all day can amplify IGF-1. So you could have an enhanced IGF-1 response on that particular day, enhanced nutrient processing response on that day. You'll be fuller on that day. You'll retain more electrolytes on that day, more intramuscular water retention on that day. You'll be stronger because of that water retention. So I will never like to use it for muscle growth on a consistent basis. But in the circumstance that you just mentioned, I might just steal it from you because I think that's a very creative and well thought out way to use it. It never occurred to me. I'm surprised that's such a simple concept. I never thought of it. But that actually seems like a very creative way of doing it. Yeah. And if you did it every day, the person would get fat, but you're just doing it one day a week. And then you're probably mitigating body fat on some other days of the week to compensate for that. But you're still getting the benefit on that body part day. So I think that's actually a great idea. I actually do like that. Now, just to cover what I was saying before about the IGF for people, I'm not going to get too confusing. But what you guys can look up is you guys can look up something called IGF-BP3. IGF binding protein 3. So what it does is it binds the IGF and it extends the half-life. So IGF has a pretty short half-life, but you could make its duration longer by elevating that. So insulin and IGF have a synergistic effect in that sense. So if you were to keep insulin elevated all day with Lantis, then your IGF levels would be amplified throughout the day as well. So just that particular day. So yes, it's a very, very strategic and smart, creative, well thought out method that I'm probably going to steal from you.
So
patent it with my name, okay?
I'll make sure I tag you.
So when you do that,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so when you do that on those days, because this is the way that I have, aside from the way that me and Phil use it, the way that I always thought to use insulin would be on the days where you're trying to bang up a lagging body part rather than trying to bang it out every day. But I know when I talked to Justin Harris, we did the episode with him. He's very big on carb cycling, as you are, Phil. I'm sure you are, Kyle, as well. The days where he will use insulin are the days where he's having those specifically higher carb days and, program them around weaker body parts. So are those days where you're using that, are they also allocated to higher carbs as well? Or is it just the same diet? Okay, you said that.
Yeah, I keep fats very low on that day. And I'm talking,
yes.
We kind of touched on, can you use the rapid insulin more frequently? But consider what is the person doing? Are they sitting home all day? Are they actually working? They can't be sitting there testing their glucose levels every half hour, right? So again, it's just like, it's circumstantial. I just found Lantis being somewhat newer to the community in the last 10 years or so. It's been more popularized. I don't know when it debuted, okay? But that's when it came more into bodybuilding. That's when I just looked at it like, okay, like maybe this is an opportunity that allows someone to, like me in the corporate world, I don't have to check as often. I'm a little safer and I'm getting better absorption for sure. But again, so that was like the general consensus behind it in theory, but again, like anything, it's trial and error, and open communication in terms of how the person's feeling and what you're seeing.
People are always looking for like the new quick fix, the biggest, baddest, newest, coolest drug that's going to make the difference for them. So they're going to, explode and look like Hunter Labrada and Nick Walker and all those guys on stage. That's the secret to me getting big, because they figured this out and I just didn't know it. Atlantis was touted as a secret. It's not. It's nothing special at all. All it is a different duration of insulin. So one thing that I wanted to make clear was, I think he mentioned this. Just because you're using Lantis on a day doesn't mean you can't also use a fast-acting insulin. Because I talked about wanting to have a peak high, right, for optimal effect, but you're going to use less of the fast-acting because you already got a baseline of higher insulin from the Lantis. So like if you were to normally, you're going to use 10 IUs post-workout, maybe you use 5. And it's going to have the same type of effect. It's already building on the already existing insulin. So just because you're using a Lantis doesn't mean you can't also use a Humalog on that day. But again, like he said, you've got to be the responsible person. People can and will screw this up and kill themselves doing it. And I don't think that somebody with a manual labor job, for example, should do this, because you're burning calories all day. You can crash very easily. Right. I don't think somebody that has a job where they can't check their blood glucose, can't have meals available, can't have food available. Like, I don't think you should do this unless you have a job where you can really sit around and monitor and be responsible. So I think that this needs to be used sparingly, but I think that it can be used effectively if you are a responsible person. I don't put people on insulin unless they've nailed down their diet, unless they've proven to me. Like if every check-in I get, I missed 2 meals this week, I missed 3 meals this week, I subbed this in, I'm never putting insulin in their program. The only people that are getting insulin in my program are the ones that don't miss meals, that don't have problems, that can follow instructions and orders to a T 100% of the time. Otherwise, we're not doing it.
Yeah. I know a lot of diabetics use both long and short-acting insulins. It's very popular amongst diabetics. But I wouldn't.
Funny because when I was growing up, my friend Seth was type 1 diabetic. We were on the wrestling team together. One of my best friends still to this day. I remember we were like 14 years old, and he was telling me before the season, I just take a little bit more insulin and it gets me bigger and stronger. I told him he was full of shit and he was making it up, and I guess he wasn't. He figured that out long before I even knew bodybuilding existed, or long before I knew insulin can have any type of muscle building anabolic effects. He figured that out because he would do that before the season, and he would get a lot stronger by just taking a little bit more insulin and then covering it with carbohydrates. And it worked out very, very well. So it can be very effective if used correctly, but I think a lot of people are just not responsible enough. First of all, one thing Kyle mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that we should have touched on earlier is your A1C. If your A1C is not in a good range, you shouldn't be playing with insulin, because you need to fix your insulin sensitivity before you even start to use insulin, because you've already got a problem. You can use insulin to fix it, but you need a very, very, very advanced and knowledgeable coach to fix it with insulin. And again, you have to be nailing down your diet, and they have to trust you. And if your A1C is really high, you probably weren't nailing down your diet. So I think that insulin also needs to coincide with A1C. And now the great thing about A1C is in the United States now it's over the counter. You can order it on Amazon. So I get A1C tests from my clients a lot without having to send them for blood work. If I see any type of issues, if I see they're a little flatter, more water retentive, if I see their pumps are not as good, strength's not increasing, I will check their A1C. Amazon will 2-day it, and I'll have it 3 days later. I'll know where your A1C is at. And this is why fasted blood glucose now, in my opinion, is completely obsolete. because there's too many determining factors that can affect that. Cortisol, how long you slept, what you ate, all of these different factors can affect that.
Yeah.
Checking your fasted blood glucose is just a snapshot at that point in time. It tells you nothing.
Your liver will also dump it.
Yeah. A1C is an average of where your blood glucose was over 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot more accurate to tell you how insulin sensitive you are right now in the ranges. People are probably going to wonder, if you're 5'4", start dieting. I don't let my guys get over 5'3", because at that point, you're just not processing your food efficiently. You're shoveling down a lot of food for very little return.
Well, yeah, you say that, but there's also genetic variance. Like, not everybody will sit into that range.
There's going to be genetic variance, but I'm giving a generalized number here for the viewership, and you have a lot of younger viewers here. Yeah. So typically, that's what the situation is going to be. And you'll even notice that people with a lower A1C that are more insulin sensitive, they peak better for shows. Like his client Antoine, I wouldn't be surprised if his A1C a week on the show was like a 4.7. So it's going to play a part in how you process things and how things work for you. But yes, there's going to be genetic variance, there's genetic outliers, but that's to everything we've talked about on this podcast. Nothing is 100% across the board, so keep that in mind. But generally, for a normal, healthy person, 5'4", you're starting to get insulin resistant. So I would back that off and fix it, because you're not getting as much out of the food that you're eating as you could. You're not getting as much return for the cost that you're paying.
Testing A1C. If you're not already regularly keeping track of your A1C and you've been keeping up with the podcast here, then what are you doing? Come on, get with the program. If you've been following me for quite some time now and have been keeping up with the podcast, then you know how much I've tried to emphasize the importance of insulin sensitivity in regards to maximizing muscle growth and health. And if you haven't already seen episodes 9 and 12 of the podcast here, where we really go into depth regarding insulin sensitivity and all that good stuff, definitely check it out. But how do we go about testing A1C? Because usually you would think you have to go get a full lab panel, and that could cost you a few $100, right? But we don't need a full lab panel just to get one health marker checked. So another way we could go about this is by doing a self-check test. You could get an at-home kit. And these are usually around $50-$60. They come with a couple kits in them. And I've used these plenty of times for myself and for clients as well. But there is an issue that comes with this, and it is that there is some room for error, and we can sometimes get false readings with these. But luckily for you guys, I have a solution, and this is something I've also been doing with my clients as well, because I recently partnered with a company called Merrick Health. Now, the cool thing about Merrick is that you could go in and order one biomarker at a time. So if you just want to test A1C, you could go onto their website, click A1C, add that to your cart, order it, then you go to any local LabCorp near you. So yes, you do have to be in America, and probably better if you're near LabCorp within driving distance. They'll take your blood, and then they'll send you the results back. Now, there's really two main benefits of doing this through Merrick, through an actual lab, as opposed to doing it at home yourself. Number one is going to be reliability. You're going to get an accurate result every time when you do it this way. Like I said, I've used the at-home test kit myself many times and with clients, and I have gotten back false readings on numerous occasions. Doesn't always happen. It's not that likely, but it still does happen. I've never seen that happen with an actual lab where you're going in, taking blood, and they're doing it, I guess, in a more professional way, right? So that reliability aspect is huge in my opinion. And two, it's even cheaper than getting the at-home test kit, because it comes down to maybe $10 to $12 with my discount code for just that one biomarker, which is really cheap, honestly. If you get the at-home test kit, I believe they're anywhere between $60, $70 and upwards, and that usually comes with 3 or 4. So divide that, it comes down to maybe a little bit more expensive, but still, then you have the reliability aspect. So I would definitely check out Merrick and use code SEB if you want to get your A1C tested, and I would do that every 8 to 12, 16 weeks at least. Also, before we resume, gotta plug HD Muscle. You guys know I love HD. They're my sponsor, great products. Really can't say much more than that. I'm not going to bore you guys with too much more information regarding the sponsors here, but if you guys order anything from HD Muscle, as always, use code SEB. Why spend more when you can spend less with code SEB? I really do appreciate the support. Now let's jump back into it. Yeah. Are you going to add something, Kyle?
Clarify, right? The A1C, as you touched on, the 90-day moving average. If someone's using insulin, that does not mean you don't check your glucose levels and assume your A1C was good, all right? Because just want to put that out there, because sometimes people hear one thing and they're like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't tell anybody to use insulin unless they're basically like at least like national level competitor. Because I think just the fact of checking your blood glucose multiple times a day is, most people just aren't going to do that, even if they have their diet note down. Like that alone deters a lot of people from checking multiple times. It's a hassle.
Yep.
Now, there's one thing I will say on here, and I am not discussing it any further. Please don't ask me to. because I'm not going to.
Okay.
Insulin can be used for fat burning too.
Yes.
But you've got to really, really, really fucking know what you're doing and be responsible. Don't look up protocols online. Don't follow this.
We've already talked about that.
There was an Easter egg in something I said a lot earlier that people could figure out potentially. So
I just want to clarify that people shouldn't be doing that without very high level guidance and very specific guidelines. But I just want to make sure that we mention that is possible.
I also do want to note, if you were to take even, say, rapid for your pre-workout meal, in that scenario, you'd always want to have intra-workout carbohydrates in place, right?
Absolutely, because you're going to have those two spikes, remember?
Yeah, that's what I'm just want to clarify that for anybody thinks they're going to take a pre-workout. You still need to have.
I have intra-workouts in my programs across the board off season. I don't have anybody that doesn't have them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't see any reason not to, unless if the person just can't afford the caloric value. Now, just real quick, we know that you're using insulin in off season, obviously primarily to shuttle the nutrients, for a lacking body part. When you do that on those days, like the high days, are you typically allocating it to just a couple specific meals, or are you doing it across the board that entire day? I know you use Lantis, but just how is the general approach to using insulin in an off season going to apply to the most people if they're looking to explore using it in their off season phase?
I think he was referring to you there.
For me, so I would say the most beginner-like approach, again, touching that peri-workout window, right? That's you get the most output, right? That's when you want things to be the most optimal. So that's how I would start, maybe with the pre-workout meal, or as I mentioned a little earlier, in between, right before the gym, for example, where as you're in the parking lot, maybe with some Rice Krispie treats or something like that, at a safe time, at a low dose, then go from there, right? Could it build up for some people? Have I had it in, let's just say if they have 6 or 7 meals, has it been in 3 meals or even maybe 4? Sure. Is it high bolus doses? Generally, no, it's not. You can only eat so much in one meal, right, at the end of the day. So we're not having 200 grams of carbs per meal or something crazy like that. So again, the advanced guys, people that are really large fellows over 230 or something like that, sure, they're pushing a little bit more, because, like they are for many things, to be that size genuinely. So if that kind of answers that.
Yeah. I was saying just start. I would say so the safest way to start with it is with a Humalog rapid.
Yeah, some kind of log, right? Which are the rapid.
Humalog.
Yep.
Yeah, pre-workout
meal. I think the logs are the safest way to go.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Now, last thing I want to touch on here is how do you guys? I mean, I already know Phil's answer. Kyle, how do you feel about using UGL growth hormone versus pharmaceutical?
So I always go back to, again, all I can go off of is anecdotal evidence, and I always try to lead from the front in terms of, I'm not going to tell you to do something that I haven't done. All right. So there's a lot of things I've done. Maybe I'm not proud of them, but hey, I'm proud that I have an answer of what to do or what not to do. And when it comes to growth hormone specifically, I've just seen a vast difference when people use pharmaceutical versus underground. Now, I know people come to me, hey, this so-and-so tested at this value. Like anything in life, there are ways to get by test, right? But how does it look when it comes to your body? What kind of responses are you getting? And it's just always been very distinct differences. Now, people, again, show those tests, and generally they're people that are just trying to get by with the cheaper option. Again, so from a logical standpoint, I guess what I just always can't wrap my head around. We know that pharmaceutical growth hormone costs a pretty penny. Okay, so let's just say it's cost $600 for a Serostim kit. All right, Serostim is a very known brand in the United States that's often prescribed to AIDS patients. Okay, that's how people are getting their hands on them. And 126 IU, 718 IU vials. That's what a kit is. Okay, so if that costs $600 and someone can manufacture in the UGL the same thing, why would someone sell it for 10% of the price? Why would someone sell it for $50, $60? That's what you can get them for. It just doesn't make sense logically, right? On paper, if you're an underground lab, you're trying to make money. It's a business. That's what people are doing, and that's how it works. So from that application, that principle alone, I always just makes me raise my eyebrow. It doesn't make any sense to begin with. Then you factor in when I had people use the same doses or even double, let's just say they're taking 10 IUs of generic growth hormone. How does it affect insulin sensitivity? I don't care if you have a little bit more water retention. I don't care if you're saying your hands are numb. What does it do to the new numbers on the scale in terms of your lab work and markers? I don't see the same effects. And then again, as far as the look itself, especially if someone's adding it in a prep, it's just vastly different. The person's around, they're bubbly, they're holding water in different. It's just different places. It looks different, and they morph. Generally, I've seen it happen. I've gone through it myself to where I went from generic. I said, okay, let me try some pharmaceutical, and I just changed. Nothing else changed. It wasn't that I took more higher doses. It wasn't that I was more serious of a bodybuilder. I got more sleep. Hell, I probably got less sleep. I just changed drastically. I can't say the same with any generic. Now, could I have got my hands on a bad generic? Sure. I've tried a lot of different things, and I've had a lot of clients and athletes over the years. I've been doing this. I'm not the youngest anymore. And I haven't seen a response with the generics to be on the same level. So my answer is save your money for pharmaceutical growth hormone. And if you really have a hard time, and you can't afford more than 3 IUs of pharmaceutical growth hormone, which can add up, then maybe I'll stack it with the generic. But generally, I just don't waste your money. If you bought 10 of them, well, damn, we got to figure out how to sell them, do something with them. But I don't push for it. I don't like it. But hey, maybe you guys have something different that you've come across.
You know my stance on this. I agree with you. I think honestly, I know this sounds accusatory, but I think a lot of the people that really strongly advocate for generics probably sell it. And then I've even had a pro come at me and go, "Oh well, I use generics and look how big I got." And my answer was, "Well, I eat McDonald's all the times and I have abs, so I guess McDonald's gives you abs." So like that's not a good example. Like Kyle said, I've had the same. I talked about it on podcasts many times. I've had the same scenario. The same exact thing happened. I was younger. I was broke. I wanted to believe that generics were as good as pharma. And, a friend of mine gave me some pharma and I used it. I was wow. And then I ran out and then I couldn't afford it. And I went back to generics and I saw the difference, but I told myself in my head it was from something else. And then I got some money together and then I ran pharma again. And all of a sudden, boom, great response again. And then ran out and was broke again and switched back to generics. And again, started trying to mind fuck myself and thinking that it was every other reason other than the fact that it was the same thing. And I had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't. And then when I finally started using pharma on a consistent basis, it's when I became a national competitor. It really made the difference. And, one of the arguments that I hate, and everybody on here is going to know this argument, everybody has heard this argument, that nobody ever wants to put logic together. For example, people take brand name Adderall, right? But a lot of times you'll get the cheaper version. You'll get the generic, right? Do you take half the dose? If you get generic antibiotics, do you take half the dose? Yeah. If you get generic painkillers, do you take half the dose? Why? Because a drug is a drug is a drug. It either works the same way or it does not. So why, when you read all the forums, all the testimonials, everybody you talk to, you just have to take more of it? That doesn't make sense. Yeah. That makes no fucking sense because there's no other generic drug on earth that you take half the dose because it's the generic version. No. And here's the thing. Anybody who has really used a good dose of pharma and a good dose of generics and is honest, unless they're selling it, will tell you it's not the same effect. It really isn't. I can't remember the exact number. I want to say somewhere near 20 IUs of generics, trying to get big just for a short period of time to see what it would do. And some things happened, not a lot. When I ran 14 IUs of pharma in prep on 50 grams of carbs a day, I was fuller than a goddamn house. I got a pump thinking about warming up. I exploded with fullness and size. It is not even in the same ballpark. It's not on the same continent. It's not even on the same planet. If you use, I challenge anybody, run 12, 14 IUs of pharma and 12, 14 IUs of generic. You tell me it's the same effect. You're a bold-faced liar if you say yes. Generics got better today and this and that. It takes millions of dollars in equipment to produce GH in a very delicate, specific process. You're telling me somebody can do this in their basement and acquire all that tech and produce it clean and safe and preserve it the right way and do all of that for the same way that a major pharmaceutical company can, when it's already a very delicate process and we know how easy it is to damage it or screw it up or mess up the sequence. It's going to be a very specific sequence. I just don't buy it, And here's the thing. People have tried to argue this for years, right? Why hasn't one single source or person shown a picture of the machinery, the process? You don't got to post your address. You don't got to post your face. Show us the processing. Why has it not happened once in the history of our sport? Because you can't. Otherwise, somebody would, right? They would listen. I've said this a million times. I've said this for years. You would shut me up real quick if you could. You haven't because you can't.
So do you think even if somebody comes back with like elevated IGF-1 levels, it's still just not doing the same thing?
Okay, we can listen. How many precursor peptides can we take? MK677 is going to elevate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. GHRPs are going to elevate it, right?
Yeah.
So we know a number of ways to elevate it.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken.
And then listen, if we want to talk about the water retention, you can just add ADH, which is what John Meadows believed they did. And then you'll have your water retention in your carpal tunnel right there. So they can simulate the side effects too. But until somebody actually posts a picture, listen, you don't got to post your address. You don't got to post your face. You could text the pictures to a friend and have them post it. I have never seen a picture of the manufacturing of actual legitimate pharmaceutical GH from a generic source. Never. I dare somebody. I challenge everybody on the internet right now. Prove me wrong.
I mean, I could tell you from my experience, I've used generics and I've used Hemotrope, Somatropin, and Geno, and those are all pharmaceuticals, and I only ever got sick with the pharmaceuticals because that's the real growth hormone. The other ones never did anything to me. I never got any effects from it whatsoever. I don't think people also know this. I don't know if you guys know this, but you could get fake growth hormone from a clinic because the same regulations are not in place with compounding pharmacies with growth hormone as they are for testosterone. So they could sell. You have to request for Hemotrope or Somatropin, but it costs way more. So they'll often sell the fake one because they could there's way more profit margin and they could get it for way less, and the regulations are not there.
You know what else is a good point? When I ran those crazy high doses of generics, my stomach was flat as a board. Flat as a board.
Yeah.
Never even an inkling of GH gut.
You must have been eating cleaner.
Yeah, maybe I was eating clean.
It's before the McDonald's.
Yeah, I ate clean a couple hours before.
Okay. Well, I think we covered a good amount when it comes to growth hormone, insulin use. Do you think there's anything we didn't cover here?
No, I think we kept this pretty simple. We avoided some complexities that were going to confuse people. I think that we pretty much stayed on the right track as far as I think anybody can listen to this and understand.
Yeah. The one thing maybe when I just want to tie it together, I don't think, unless it was when I had the sunlight blinding me, we didn't touch on the growth hormone and insulin together.
We did a little bit. I explained the IGF BP3 a little bit in conjunction with what you mentioned about the Lantis. We didn't do a specific section on it, but I did throw tidbits in there as far as the insulin compensating for the resistance effects from GH and the amplification of IGF-1 with the IGF BP3. Again, you can scroll back in this. I explained what it meant and how it worked.
Well, from what I gathered was you could obviously use insulin without the presence of growth hormone. We know that with growth hormone, it's usually insinuated that you want to use insulin with the presence of it. But if you're using a low enough dosage, say 4 IUs, you're probably not going to need insulin. But it's really going to come down to you actually just continuously measuring your blood glucose and making a decision from there rather than just jumping the gun and assuming you need insulin present.
Yes, here's the thing. You can, if you're in contest prep, for example, you don't need to use insulin with GH because you're continually improving your insulin sensitivity. So if you're on a diet, then you're not going to need insulin with the GH because you're continually improving your insulin sensitivity anyway by getting leaner. So that's a scenario where you don't really need it. And if you're going to use the insulin, you can use a lower dose and still be just as effective because you're increasing your sensitivity by getting leaner. So body composition is a huge part of using insulin and GH. Better composition, better response across the board. So I don't like a lot of the things there's certain popular people in this industry, like Sam Silk, for example. He's got I respect the kid, works hard. The kid's got good genetics, built a lot of muscle. He's a lot bigger than I was at that age. Very nice kid, well-spoken. I'm sure he's a great kid, but he's got a platform and he's got influence. And there's a lot of kids copying how junky he eats. And that is not a good example. He's got good genetics. He works hard, most of you are not going to get away with eating the way he eats. It's going to affect you adversely. If you eat cleaner, it's always going to be better. Now, the only circumstance I think in which you shouldn't eat clean is when I was younger, my metabolism was so fast, I wasn't getting 6,000 calories in clean food. It was not going to happen. The volume of that was tremendous. So I had to eat things like Pop-Tarts. Listen, I could have made some better choices, clearly, but I still needed nutrient-dense foods because there's no way to get in all of those calories in a day. But if you can, that's your best bet. Now, keep in mind, I ate junky for years. I have colitis now. I wrecked my digestion from it. Eating junky is going to destroy your digestion, and you're going to pay for it later in life. I pay for it now. I have to take BPC every single day because if I don't, I start to have digestive issues. So keep that in mind. Junk food, you're going to pay for it. If you can eat clean, great. Control your body composition, great. Don't copy the people that can get away with it. Sam Sulik, he can get away with it. Most of you cannot. Don't copy what he does.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's applicable to everything. People just compare and don't want to accept the fact that everybody's different. I even had a client ask me the other night, they're like, am I ever going to be able to push food the way I see these guys push food? Because he's somebody who gains fat very easily. He doesn't have the best genetics. He's like the opposite of you, right? He goes past 3,000 calories. He's just going to start putting on fat, all these things at the stage. So it's like, no, that's never going to be you. It doesn't matter. Like that's not in the cards for you. And people, the grass also isn't green on the other side. Cause when you have to eat like that, it fucking sucks. You feel like shit all the time. You're lethargic. I personally would rather take a little bit of hunger and restriction over having to push food like that.
My first couple of years after I retired from bodybuilding, I got great pleasure walking into the kitchen, looking at the fridge and going, fuck you, and walking out. Like I ate till I was nauseous for 10 years. I can't tell you how much that sucks. I'm starving now. I don't give a shit. I love starving. I am. Mm-hmm. It is the worst to eat till you're nauseous, and then everybody's watching the clock to their next meal because they're hungry. I'm like, please slow down. Like, don't God damn it, my meal's in an hour. Like, it's miserable. So there's always an upside and there's always a downside to everything. But honestly, I mean, maybe this is personal bias. I'd rather starve than be nauseous.
Kyle, did you have that problem?
No, man, I'm a fat kid, man. I can put on weight easy. That's not. I look at food.
Well, Kyle's very, very good at executing his plan. If you tell Kyle don't cheat for a year, he won't cheat for a year. Like he can nail down a plan as good as anyone. He just gets very busy. He stresses himself. He's a perfectionist. He's really hard on himself when he shouldn't be. He prioritizes his clients above himself, to an unhealthy extent sometimes. But Kyle could be a very, very, very good competitor. He is a Nick Walker type executor, but Nick Walker is more of a selfish type where he can make that happen, whereas Kyle's the complete opposite, and he'll always put himself in the back seat. So, he runs into those problems because of that. But he's extremely good at executing a program.
Kyle, are you still going to compete?
I like to look like I can and have the decision that I can ultimately make. Whether or not that happens, I had 2 years off is how I look at it. I gave my body a 2-year break, so I'm interested to see how things respond. It's exciting. I enjoy going to the gym again. I had really good training sessions last week. I got to train with Anton. I have him moving back here for his prep, so it gives me some motivation, right? And I always like being next to someone that's better than me. He's a pro. He's got a great, way better physique than I ever had. So I always like that helps push me. And I always think for people, the biggest, not to get off topic, right? But I just think it's important. If you have a good training partner, someone that pushes you, whether or not they have the genetic potential, once they're set, they get off the floor. That's something I always enjoyed and admire in people. And you don't find that too often, right? Where people can hold you accountable and they just want to be the best versions of themselves. But that's like a big factor. And people I see progress are people that they have someone they're always training with. They're always.
I would put that in the top 5. I'd put that in the top 5 of most important things to do in bodybuilding is having a training partner. For sure. I have literally watched clients acquire a training partner and just immediately accelerate and not stop accelerating in progress. Just because I didn't change the program. I didn't work any magic. I didn't put them on high doses. I didn't scrutinize them or put more pressure on them. Everything fucking just changed. Sometimes I didn't even know about it. I'm like, where did all this progress come? Oh, I got a new training partner. Oh, shit. All right, great.
Yeah. No, it makes a tremendous difference. I have 2 clients who actually became friends because they ran to each other at the gym and they realized that they were both my clients and they became best friends and their training partners and they both just they train insane. They blew up together and it makes a drastic difference. I look at guys like, Brett Wilkin and Martin, that relationship they have and how they push each other that it's huge. It's hard to find somebody like that. It really is.
I think that Brett Wilkins played a very big part in Martin's progress. And now look at how good Martin is. Martin is like, he's looking like a top 5 contender, sooner than later. And 100%. I think that part of that is because of linking up with Brett, and Brett has that, perfect bodybuilder mindset. He knows when to pull back. He knows when to push. He knows how to eat. He knows how to use things properly. Brett is a very, very, very smart bodybuilder and very good at executing. And I think he was a phenomenal influence on Martin. And because of that, Martin might do some very, very big things soon.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I was there firsthand, and even it's crazy because even being in that environment, like training at Armbrust and just being in the gym when they're there, like it has an impact on you because just people don't train like that. Even though you might not even be training with them, just being in that type of environment, it's
they train very, very hard. And we don't have a lot of that in today's bodybuilding. So anybody watching this, if you guys want good examples of leadership, those guys are 2 guys to watch.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. But all right, guys, I think we covered a good amount here. Anything you guys want to close out on?
I proposed earlier this week that since Sebastian's going to be coming down to Florida and Kyle has some free time, we should get some training content for you guys.
Where? Kyle's coming down?
Eventually, at some point.
I'll come down. I'll get some training. I just need both of you to be on, be ready to train. I have 2 years of a nice break, so I'm ready to go.
I just had a year break.
So look, and Phil, you had a 5-year break. Here we are.
I'm doing good right now. I'm ready to go.
All right.
That'd be cool to get back into that'd be cool to do something together for sure. So we'll make it happen.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Well, all right, guys. Thanks for coming on again. You guys, anything you guys want to plug? Anything you got going on, either of you?
Nothing much here. I got some projects that are coming up, but I'm not announcing them just yet. Some classes, things like that. But that'll be announced on my social media at a future date. We'll probably do another podcast here before I launch any of it.
Yeah. You, Kyle?
No, just anybody interested in Young LA clothing can use code SIR, and then I always represent Axton Sledge. I enjoy their products. Seth and I have a good relationship, and their protein's easily digestible, to say the least, for many that have issues. So code SIR with that one as well, or message me for questions. I'll send you some samples, and I always like advocating, good companies. I know Phil, I think you're with HD, so right?
Yeah. I've been with HD for a long time simply because I can trust their integrity. The new company that I'm with, actually, that's becoming extremely popular is Uprising. A lot of people have been using Uprising, and we've been doing some really good things. So if you guys want to look into that, it's been helping a lot of people with mental health issues, with appetite issues, sleep issues. You name it across the board. The Descend has been a enormous major player in people in contest prep that can't sleep. The Descend has been knocking people out cold with quality sleep. People have been using sleep trackers. It's deep sleep. It's been working out phenomenally. So that's actually one of the things that I've started incorporating in prep is the Descend to help people sleep, because we know how hard it is to get people to sleep inside 4 weeks.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, make sure you guys check them out. I think we're going to do these more regularly. I think the next episode we touched on briefly. I think that was a good idea. So if you guys like this stuff, make sure you drop a like. Subscribe to the channel, drop a comment down below if there's anything you specifically want to see us cover. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding.